Ladies and gentlemen, recorded in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, it's time for Fight Night Picks with your hosts, Craig and Matt Allen.
And just like that, we're back and we're getting set for UFC Fight Night, Jan versus Dvalishvili, a big time card coming at you this weekend. 14 total fights scheduled on Saturday night, the UFC's first card from the theater at the Virgin Hotels. As always, one half of your host and duo, Craig Allen. Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. With me to my left, to your right, Matt Allen, respective socials at Matt Allen FNP. Matt Allen, 12-2 last weekend.
Let's go.
8-2 the weekend before. Fight Night Picks is rolling, heading into this busy weekend. And when it comes to it, the UFC, I mean, they've really liked that Apex facility for a lot of these Fight Night cards. But when you look at it, a new venue over there, it used to be the Joint at the Hard Rock, but the Hard Rock moved. And then the first performance that they ever had at the theater was Christina Aguilera. She opened it up. But I know you get excited about it, and I'll talk about it as we move
Christina
away.
Aguilera or the fights?
No, but Ramirez Taylor was held at the Virgin Hotel, so a lot of cool stuff. I went to see the 1975 there back in November. It was a pretty darn good venue, so hopefully the fight fans are excited for that one. But when it comes down to these fights, I know we're really excited about it. And when you focus in on the main event, top 5 bantamweights, Petr Yan, his second fight post-title. He had 4 straight fights for a type of title, because that Corey Sandhagen fight was for the interim belt. For Merab, 8-fight win streak coming into this one against Petr Yan. In the co-main event, Alexander Volkov, 4-3 in UFC main events. This is second only co-main event slot. And the last time he co-mained, he beat Greg Hardy. Alexander Romanov, his last time out, majority decision loss. He's rewarded to go up in the division to fight Volkov. Some big fights here this weekend.
I got a new girl now, and she's a lot like you. If you're going to rebound off one of the best pay-per-views of the year, you're going to want to rebound with probably the best fight night of the year, too. And this is one of the better fight nights we've had in a meaningful period of time. Like, I'm genuinely excited for the majority of the fights on this card. And you mentioned it. A main event in the bantamweight division is already a pretty exciting thing, no matter where they're ranked. But 2 top 5 bantamweights in arguably the best division in the whole UFC is a fight that pretty much anyone can get excited for. And Petr Yan is a guy who, even when he loses, it's by this much. Like, he is putting on impressive performances, and we know how good of a 5-round fighter he has been throughout his career, but Merab Dvalishvili is that little engine that could. He might not really wow you with any one area of his game. I take that back. The wrestling is so
spinning
dominant
back
with
fist.
it. But with Merab, it's really just his, go and his drive that gets him a lot of these wins. He has incredible cardio, and that's why I do think this is such a great main event. A lot of these heavyweight main events, you kind of wonder, okay, how's this fight going to look after the second round? Merab and Petr Yan are going to fight at the exact same pace in the 5th round that they will in the 1st round. So I think this is a great main event, and that's not even to mention the 9, 10, 11 great fights we have on this card.
And a number of ranked fighters on this one, 6 to be exact. We're going to throw it on over to our fight of the night screen. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have in the fight of the night. 14 to choose from, and you're not wrong till Saturday night.
Let us know down below in the comment section who you've got. It's time for the fight of the night with Fight Night Picks.
And at Fight Night Picks, we don't like to cherry pick off of the main events, but Petr Yan taking on Merab Dvalishvili. If you look at it for Petr Yan, you consider some of the fight of the nights. They start with Jin Susan, and they continue on. And if Justin Gaethje, Michael Chandler didn't exist in 2021, Petr Yan probably would have won a fight of the year against Corey Sandhagen. Just a technical masterclass for Merab his last time out. He sent Jose Aldo to boxing, and he ended up with a giant win there against the now future UFC Hall of Famer Aldo. But Merab and Petr Yan, you touched on it already. These two guys have 5-round fight styles. They can throw fight enders. Merab's got a wild right hand and those spinning back fists. Sometimes he can kind of get himself caught to become a helicopter, and he just continues to spin for them. But for both these guys, fan-friendly styles, a really cool poster that the UFC's done for this one, and a great fight in this main event.
It's a long night if you're fighting Merab Dvalishvili. You can be one of the greatest fighters of all time. You can be a guy just freshly coming off Contender Series. His style is suffocating, so you better have worked on your cardio quite a bit if you are getting ready for a fight with Merab. But I will be interested to see how his pace endures throughout a 5-round fight, because again, Petr Yan's a guy who doesn't waste a lot of movement. He's not going to throw a lot of big shots, miss them, and then tire as a result of it. But in his last fight, we did see a bit of a weakness weakness to him. He has good takedown defense, we can all agree on that, but if you can get past that takedown defense and hold him down, he is a little bit susceptible to some of that grappling. And with Merab Dvalishvili, not only just being a training partner with Aljamain Sterling, those guys are pretty close. So he has a great training camp to work for to get ready for a guy like Petr Yan. And it'll be interesting to see what happens if Dvalishvili is able to get the win, because again, his training partner is the champion, and if you beat a guy like Petr Yan, well, you're probably not then going to go back and fight the 15th guy. You're probably getting ready for a title shot. So I'll be really interested to see what happens to the winner of this fight.
Well, and it's a big time fight in the main event, and for a second pick here, fight of the night, staying in the weight class. Now, I thought about going with Mario Bautista, who's taking on Guido Cannetti, but both those guys, a lot of finishes between them. So for Victor Henry, Tony Gravely, these two guys, I mean, you talk about experience, the 28 pro fights for Henry, the championships over in Asia. For Tony Gravely, King of the Cage champ, CES champ, he's put on a great run of fights in the UFC. But both these guys, like, they really do need a win to get some traction in this division. And for Henry, one is a giant underdog in his UFC debut. Lost as a giant favorite his last time out. So both these guys need this opportunity, and I think they're going to come out of the gates just firing in this match.
For Victor Henry, he really does have to steady the ship, and I think this is a great fight to try to get back on the horse, because if he is going to beat a guy like Tony Gravely, it's going to really test his wrestling in this matchup, which is something we've seen him excel at in the past. But for Gravely, the thing I really like about him is he's set in his ways, but I mean that in a great way. You know what he excels at, you know what he's weak at. So for Victor Henry, it's really going to come down to what kind of a game plan he brings into the cage, but I think this is a great fight between two really talented fighters.
Couple of big time matchups that we've gone through, but again, 14 total fights on the card. Let us know who you have in the Fight of the Night screen. So when it comes to the fights this weekend, 14 total fights, UFC debuts from Dana White's Contender Series veteran, Florida man Sedriques Dumas. It's $100 maybe to talk to him. His manager's going to deny it. Matt Dumas is going to be taking on short notice opponent in Josh Fremd. We also have U.S. Virgin Islands' own Karl Williams, and he's still going to be competing at heavyweight, taking on Poland's Lukasz Brzeski.
That's a fun one.
And it's a tough name to really pronounce for us here in Canada. And Matt, we also have Dana White's Contender Series Week 7 main eventer. It's Vitor Petrino. He's going to be taking on the pleasure man, Anton Turkalj, so a big-time matchup there. I'm really looking forward to that one. We also have the rebooking of February 25th's main event. Exactly. It was supposed to be Nikita Krylov taking on Ryan Spann. It was announced out there in the broadcast. The score kind of picked it up, but looked like Krylov had some food poisoning the day of the fight. Now it's out, but that's going to be a 3-round fight, so really interesting.
And
now
we were both really excited for that fight too. Like, that's how great this card is. That is a main event caliber fight that is now just on the main card as like a great addition. So that just speaks to the whole depth of this card.
So a really tough one there, but a lot of good fights all the way down through. The return of Ricardo Ramos. She was supposed to fight last summer. He hasn't fought in a meaningful amount of time. Austin Lingo hasn't fought in about 2 years. Said Nurmagomedov is going to be taking on Jonathan Martinez. The Dragon's on a 4-fight win streak. Nurmagomedov's on a 4-fight win streak. And if you like the last name Nurmagomedov, Carlston Harris is going to be taking on Abubakar and Nurmagomedov. I know there's a lot of fun fights that we like on this one. I know a 43-year-old little engine who coaches his own team at Our Town MMA. Guido Cannetti is going to look to make it 3 in a row against Mario Bautista. Matt, I screamed my lungs out when Alexa Grasso won her title last night against Valentina Shevchenko. I'm already turning red about these fights right now. I'm very excited about this card.
I do want to know, I just want to give a little bit of shine to one fight that nobody's going to talk about this week, but I'm oddly excited for it. Shout out JJ Aldrich and Ariane Lipski. I know that's a fight that's buried deep on the prelims. Again, you might laugh at me being excited for that kind of a fight, but JJ Aldrich gave arguably the #1 contender in this division the hardest fight of her career up until this point. So I've always really respected Aldrich. I know she's never going to reach the heights of some of these other contenders, but she's one of those fighters who, you know that her floor isn't all that low. You know what she's good at. She has great boxing, good defensively. So I think that fight against Lipski is oddly going to be a really fun one on the prelims.
It should be a big one, and it means a lot to both of those women's career. Coming up this weekend, Matt, again, you look at it, 14 total fights. Abbas Magomedov kind of floating in the ether because his fight against Mahmoud Muradov is kind of left out there. So if there are any changes, any fights that are added, we'll be sure to get those out to you as soon as we possibly can here on YouTube. You can find us at Fight Night Picks, Twitter and Instagram, #kicks 2 hours before the prelims. It should be a big time card. We got a lot to talk about. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say, let's get into it. Coming up this weekend at welterweight, Guyana's lone UFC fighter, it's Carlston Harris, the former Brave CF welterweight champ. He's going to look to try and fix some things because he's burnt some time off the clock. He turns 36 coming up in July, and he's going to be taking on the once heralded, much talked about Abubakar Nurmagomedov. And this guy, you know him for his combat sambo lineage. He trained heavily under Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov. And for Abubakar, this is a guy that's perennially a giant favorite in his fights. And there's been bouts of inactivity throughout his career as well. So we have a big time fight coming up this weekend. And when you really do look at it for Carlston Harris, this is a guy that came in off of Dana White's Looking for a Fight, Abu Dhabi 3.0. It's a mouthful over there on YouTube. But Harris...
was Nick the Tooth in that season?
No, he was not. In that one, it was Khabib. He's sitting next to Dana White. They're going to watch the fights, and it was Khabib's guy that was taking on Harris in the kind of culmination of the show. And Harris comes out, you know, he's a little bit older, and Dana talked about it after the fact when he went to sign him. I don't really sign 33, 34-year-olds, but this guy put on a heck of a performance. And if you watch the fight for Harris, it's one of those UAE Warriors EFC merger type of cards they had when the UFC was going to Fight Island, at Yas Island, at Abu Dhabi. And if you look at it for Harris, it was that signature anaconda choke that he was able to get. And then he parlays that into a UFC debut against Christian Aguilera, where Aguilera was putting him on the back foot. He was pouring it on. And Aguilera is one of those guys, small for the weight class. Harris, really long. He's got long arms. He knows his range quite well. And for Harris, what does he do? Out of a takedown attempt from Aguilera, oh my gosh, another anaconda choke. So another great win for Harris. His second time out in the UFC. He beats Impa Kasanganay, gets a bonus out of that one. And then his last time out, he gets spinning wheel kicked by Shavkat Rakhmonov, future champ. So it's been about a year, a little over a year on the shelf for Carlston Harris. And now he's got to pick up the pieces, almost 36 in this division.
Would you agree with me that the Impa Kasanganay win that Harris has is actually more impressive than just the name would suggest? Because the one thing about Kasanganay is he does keep his hands up very well. I know a lot of people know him for that crazy knockout against Joaquin Buckley, but Kasanganay is a guy who defensively with his boxing does quite well. So for Harris to be able to go in there and really hurt him with the hands, I was really impressed by that performance. But that was the hard thing for Harris, and I'm glad that you opened this episode with that. Harris came to the UFC a little bit too late in his life, and it does feel like a little bit of his athleticism has been lost along the way. Carlston Harris was at his best, 27 to 31 perhaps, and it would have been nice to kind of see him with the experience he has now, with the athleticism of a younger man, because he has great power in his hands when he's able to get his stand-up going. He's a guy who can fight going backwards. He's not great when he is pressured, but he will plant and throw with a lot of power shots to respond, and when he moves forward, he does have a lot of success. The problem is, a lot of people I feel like are going to be very down on Harris, but I'm kind of glad that you said Nurmagomedov is normally a big favorite in a lot of his fights, so it is surprising to see him being the slight underdog, but Harris is one of those guys who, you look at his record, 17-5, it's good, but it's not great, so you wouldn't really think he gets the respect from the odds makers, but I think it does speak to just how good Harris is. You look at some of his wins before he came to the UFC, he wasn't fighting just random guys off the street. He beat Wellington Turman, who I know we don't respect him the most in the division, but still, it's not like he's fighting guys you've never heard of on his way to the UFC.
No, when you go through Harris's record, you look at the wins, you look at the losses. He beat Zoltan Luderbach, who's fought with every big organization and fought everybody you probably heard of. A win over Wellington Turman, a win over Demolador, Michel Pereira, and then when he was over with Brave, he won the title and he was fighting against Carl Booth, a heck of a fighter.
Yeah.
And you've seen Carl Booth with Cage Warriors, you've seen him with different organizations. He's a really good fighter. He loses to draw Hussein Al-Salawi, who's now with the PFL, if I'm not mistaken. And Salawi, I mean, at the time, he only had a couple losses on his record, and he continued to hold the belt over there with Brave.
I'd rather you lose to him than just keep on beating guys who are 0-11 your whole career.
But after that, a lot of wins. And to me, Carlston Harris is one of those guys, like, if you knew New Japan Wrestling, then you knew the Bullet Club, and then they kind of made their way over to North America. AEW well, to me, Carlston Harris is like that. So I've already let the cat out of the bag with the shirt in the first fight in the card. But if you look at it and you flip it on its head for Nurmagomedov, this guy, again, I say, is a known commodity. And he had that one loss early on in his career against Magomed Mustafayev, where He took him down 3 times, and a cut ended the fight.
Exactly.
So it was really tough loss there. Reminds me of like when Liz Carmouche beat Valentina Shevchenko years and years ago. But you go down through the record for Abubakar Nurmagomedov, and it starts when he's with World Series of Fighting. He takes on Moreno. He's a -800 favorite. The fight against Frenku, -450. The fight against Sean Howard, who at that point was a UFC vet, -385. The fight against Pavel Kusha over with PFL, -1400, and he loses that fight. The fight that he has against Jonathan Weston, -740. The fight against David Zavada, UFC debut, -315 favorite. He gets submitted in that. He goes for the takedown. Zavada sinks up the choke, which is a Carlston Harris type of thing. And then you go down through it. The fight against Gooden, -220, and the fight against Omar Gadriev, -140 favorite. So out of this again, Nurmagomedov, big favorite in all of these fights. We know how good his top pressure and his control are in these fights.
And he pumps the jab.
He pumps the jab. His right hand's good. He switches stances quite a bit to offer a different look. And with Abubakar Nurmagomedov, it's probably my mistake, but I compare him to a guy like Ramazan Emeev a little bit because Abubakar tends to box as the fights go on. But he's a little bit better with his gas tank. He's a little bit better with his output than a guy like Ramazan Emeev. Now, he leaves himself out there to get hit, and he drops his hands as the fight go on. But if you look at it for Nurmagomedov, no giant peaks and valleys. He tends to fight on a straight line. Whereas for Harris, I haven't necessarily seen that straight line fighter in a really long time because he's either finished the fight or he's been finished in the fight. So a tricky fight to try and cap if you're trying to make a pick on it. But when we're previewing this one, like, this is a really fun fight. And for Nurmagomedov, his last time out against Omar Gadriev, a guy who fights in the peaks and valleys with his takedowns, the leg kick out of the southpaw position was a game changer for Nurmagomedov in that one.
It was. I gotta be honest though, I do worry a little bit about Nurmagomedov's striking. Not that it's bad by any means, but he has tended to do it a little bit more early on in his fights. And I think if he went out there and wrestled a lot against a guy like Harris, yes, Harris is dangerous with the submissions, but if you get past that first hurdle and actually get him on his back, I do think it makes for an easier fight for a guy like Nurmagomedov, because on the feet, I do favor Harris, especially with his power. If he's able to get on the inside of the range of Nurmagomedov, you bring it up. The footwork of Abubakar is very high level, so it's going to be difficult for Harris to really cut the cage off, but I still do think I favor Harris in a lot of the straight striking matchups. The thing about this fight, though, that I do have trouble with is the fact that it's a very close fight odds-wise, and I do agree with that. I think this fight could go either way, but I think once the time the fight is over, it will be somewhat one-sided. I think it's going to be a fight where either Nurmagomedov goes out there, really does stifle Harris with the jab, and I think the jab is going to be key, because if he uses the jab to make Harris overcommit, that's going to make Harris a lot more susceptible to the takedowns when he ducks.
And a lot of people thought it was cool when Trevor Peeks started to throw those kind of crazy shots and he's hitting with the inside of his palm, but Carlston Harris does the same thing. He throws a lot of these hooks. He went 1, 2, 3 hooks against Kasanganay, and then it was a ground and pound that finished the fight off. But if you watch it for Harris, he commits a lot to these shots, and his life story is kind of reminiscent of a guy that we had fighting recently in Themba Gorimbo, who left Zimbabwe at a younger age for South Africa for a better life. For Carlston Harris on Dana White's Looking for a Fight, he said, listen, about 10 years ago, I left my family in Guyana for Brazil to start training in MMA and really try and just improve the overall quality of life. And then after the win, Dana looks at Khabib and he says, word for word, I'm going to go get position in the room where I'm going to do this thing. I mean, my goodness.
How confused was Khabib? Did he think about calling security and warning Carlston?
He probably thought, is he going to try and have this talk again with me on ABC? Like, is this what we're doing again? He's going to try and reel me back into fighting. But when it does come down to it, you look at the odds. The favorite is Carlston Harris. The underdog is Abubakar Nurmagomedov. We have a look at the fan vote, Matt. Surprise to us, it is to you. We're going to have a look over on Topology. I'm going to say over, under. Abubakar Nurmagomedov tends to be a fan favorite. I'm actually going to say over under. It's going to be close. 60% Nurmagomedov.
I was thinking 70 for Harris, so I'm going to say you said 60 for Abubakar.
Yeah.
I'll say under.
You're going to say under. And look at that. So 604 total votes, 57% Harris, 54% by submission for the 43% that have Nurmagomedov, 79% by decision. And for Nurmagomedov, we haven't seen a finish win in years and years and years and years. And his striking looked great against Jared Gooden, who just kept his hands down because he was so afraid of the takedown. So in this matchup, I think Harris would be more accepting of a takedown than some of the recent opponents. But it's a tough fight for either man. And again, you're only 2-1 each of these guys in the UFC. UFC. For Nurmagomedov over 3 years ago is when he made his debut. Harris has been the more active fighter, though he hasn't fought in a year. So I'm really eager to see what we get out of this.
Can we give the Tapology voters a little bit of shine, though? Because I think that's an educated vote saying Harris is going to win by submission. For the reasons you had brought up. Abubakar Nurmagomedov's a guy who will leave his head open on a takedown. Now, that's the problem I have with this fight. Harris can take advantage of the grappling when it's standing, if you will, or at least on the transitions before they hit the mat. I think when it does hit the mat, we will see Nurmagomedov not dominate. I think that's a step too far, but at least do better. He's in the top position. He's very heavy from that spot. So I think if he can avoid some of the transitionary submissions of Harris, he could have success. But the problem is, we have seen Nurmagomedov struggle, or at least become more of a striker at this point of his career. So I'll be curious to see what kind of a game plan he has coming into this fight against Harris. I'm actually going to go with the underdog in this fight. I do have Nurmagomedov. I do think his wrestling is going to be good enough for the reasons I brought up. If he gets submitted in the first round, I will raise my hand and admit, hey, that's a great way for him to lose. But I think he will get past that initial threshold of the submission. I've been out here giving Carlston Harris his flowers for the past 2 weeks because we talked about him a lot when we broke down Shavkat Rakhmonov's last fight because of how talented of a name he is to have on your resume. But I'm going to go with the slight underdog because I do think Nurmagomedov's wrestling is going to at least bank him 2 rounds.
I mean, it feels like that 1986 Ozzy Osbourne song, Shot in the Dark. I mean, it's tough to tell who's going to win this one. Abubakar Nurmagomedov, for as good as he is, again, the combat sambo lineage that he has, he's an international master of sport in combat sambo under the tutelage of Abdul Manap. He's got that in his back pocket. He likes to leave the neck out, and when he goes for it, sometimes he'll reach for that single leg, and he tends to go low on the knee and then ride it up high crotch to go for the dump. That's exactly how Carlston Harris has finished so many opponents, locking up the guillotine, then doing the roll, getting his anaconda choke. I like Carlston Harris in the matchup just because there's some lapses in the striking. Now, for Abubakar Nurmagomedov, for this fight in particular, he's trained at a lot of different gyms. This one seems like from his Instagram, it's at AKA San Jose. Javier Mendez loves to bring in those boys to train. So I do like Harris ever so slightly in the fight, but there's definitely value in Nurmagomedov, who's been a favorite all the time, every time, and now you get him as an underdog. We're split on the pick. Matt going with Nurmagomedov. I'm going to go with Guyana's Carlston Harris. A big-time fight. 14 total on the card. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Coming up this weekend, 39-year-old flyweight Tyson has fought some of the world's best since he debuted as a pro back in 2006 when Matt Allen was 8. And coming up, he's going to be trying to turn away yet another top-tier prospect in the Bulldog, Bruno Silva, a guy who's been out of action for quite some time. And for Tyson like Roy Jones Jr. back in 2021, Tyson was able to go out there, turn back the clock, and you look at some of these wins that he's had. I mean, my goodness, for Tyson last time out, giant underdog, Ode Osborne knocks him out. I mean, it's just like, stop Virgil Hill with a body shot. Y'all must have forgot. Tyson
and that was a right hook to the body, too, which no one had ever seen before. A left hook to the body, okay, it's a liver shot. Roy Jones put him down with a right hook.
But I mean, Nam, going back through the record, even on the 5-on-in, he's got a loss to Kai Kara France, a loss to Matt Schnell by split decision. The knockout wins, Zaruk Adashev, Jerome Rivera, and that last one last year against Ode Osborne really put him over with a lot of people. And Nam, you look at even just the loss in the UFC, comes in on short notice and fights Sergio Pettis and loses that fight. Pettis went on to do good things, not only in the UFC, or he had already done good things in the UFC, went on to win that Bellator title, and it held a lot of water with a lot of people because he knocked out Kyoji Horiguchi, who's still a pretty darn good fighter. So in this matchup, you have Gracie Technic's own Tyson he's training with a former foe a coach in Russell Doan. So a lot of big things there for Nam. But he did an interview with JHK, the All-Star MMA, and the quotable out of it and the title out of it was, like, he likes to throw that right, and I like to throw that right hand. We can play right hand for right hand. I like that gamble. So out of Tyson he's excited for it. Bruno Silva, last 2 fights, knockout wins. He's got performance bonuses in the UFC. Knocked down JP Bays 3 times in the second round till he finished him, and he knocked out Victor Rodriguez last time out. But we haven't seen Bruno Silva in a meaningful amount of time, almost 2 years. He's a fight-ready guy. He competed on The Ultimate Fighter years and years ago. So Bruno Silva got a lot of catching up to do, even though he's on a 2-fight win streak. Tyson hot off that win over Ode Osborne, and now that win ages well off what Osborne looked like against Charles Johnson a couple of weeks ago. So this fight, I know it's outside of the rankings, but there's a lot to be excited about a matchup of two guys that not only in the quotable, you know it from watching their fights, they like to throw the right hand.
They certainly do. I just wish Tyson Nam weighed 10 more pounds so we could fight Cody Garbrandt, because I think he's too perfect of an opponent for him. I really do. That's kind of besides the fact, that's just a little side note, but I really like Tyson Nam for what he is, but the problem is, you do know what you're going to get with Tyson Nam. Like, he is a very technical striker, he's extremely accurate, he throws great straight shots, he mixes the kicks in well, but on the inside, he does struggle with guys who are better power punchers, and I would say Bruno Silva can follow a game plan similar to that. Bruno Silva, what I do like about him is he realizes that his boxing can synergize with his wrestling, and he does mix the two together quite well. Now,
I don't see that working in this fight at all.
I don't, because I do think the movement of Nam is going to give him quite a bit of an advantage with that, but I still think Nam is going to struggle if Silva does get on that inside range. The thing is, for Nam, at what point is the age going to catch up to him? I know 39 years old isn't young for any division outside of the heavyweight division, but normally when we talk about guys in the featherweight, bantamweight, flyweight division, it's what, 32, 33? We worry about them slowing down. And for Nam, to his credit, he still has been able to maintain that athleticism to this stage of his career, but at 39, I think that is a fair point to bring up and just something to be concerned about.
Well, I mean, last weekend we had question marks, the Trevin Jones fight against Garbrandt. They had poor recent runs. For Bruno Silva, he started off UFC 243, the UFC debut, and he's taking on Khalid Taha. He gets dropped in the first round. He gets submitted in the third round. And then Taha has a little bit of USADA issue for furosemide. So Bruno Silva goes out there, loses to David Dvorak. But it's a close enough fight. He loses to Tagir Ulanbekov. Some people thought that Bruno Silva won that
those
fight.
Those are two really good fighters to fight coming off of a no contest.
And then he beats Bays, who I couldn't believe it. He's still in the UFC. He's lost 3 fights and a couple of them by knockout, but he's still in the UFC. They threw that graphic up there last weekend when Cameron Simon and Dricus du Plessis were fighting, and he knocks out Victor Rodriguez, who was promptly cut from the UFC. And I said not nice things about Victor Rodriguez. It wrote a character on my part. I apologize to Victor Rodriguez, but that win's a little tricky. So for Nam, we hold him with some reverence, but I will say this about Tyson Nam. Number 1 in UFC history with fewest or lowest bottom percentage time at 0% and 0% being caught on the bottom as well, or 0, seconds, minutes, so to speak. So he's tied there with Adrian, it's pronounced Yanez, Adrian Yanez. So both those guys never been taken down and never been held down. So for Tyson Nam coming into this one, we know how good the striking can be. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt for Bruno Silva, who was featured on Dana White's The Ultimate Fighter Brazil Season 4 at the age of 24 in 2015. He broke Gustavo Cedario's jaw, and then he got submitted by Danilo Lopez, who went on to go to the finals of that season. But when it really does come down to this one, Matt, again, Nam's 3-3 in the UFC. Bruno Silva's what, 2-2 with a no contest, call it 2-3. When you look at this, though, I'm surprised that we've had so much inactivity from Bruno Silva, considering that the nickname's the Bulldog. He trains at Fight Ready. His main coach is Eric Albarracin. He spends a lot of time with Henry Cejudo, who's going to be fighting Aljamain Sterling up a weight class at UFC 288 in May for the title. And for Silva, he's been a Pitbull Brothers guy, too, for a really long time as well. So Bruno Silva, to me, in my mind's eye, he's got a much more diverse skill set than a guy like Tyson Nam. But Nam, to his credit, good takedown defense. He's beaten really good wrestlers like Ali Baglatinov when he was with Fight Nights Global. And for Nam, what has he not seen that a guy like Bruno Silva can bring to him? That's the interesting thing for me.
No, you're 100% right. This is what I can openly admit. I feel like I'm a little too high on Tyson Nam after the Ode Osborne win.
And listen, we didn't pick Tyson Nam to beat Ode Osborne either.
So that's what I'm openly admitting right now. As the underdog, I kind of want to say, hey, Tyson Nam's going to go in there. He is the more technical guy, but Bruno Silva has a skill set that can beat guys like Tyson Nam. For as pretty as the striking is of Tyson Nam, he can get caught in a mirror sometimes. He does struggle with guys who can get on the inside and really rush him. And the thing about Nam is, he does strike well off the back foot. But do you know how we know that? It's because he is willing to give up distance a lot in his fights. And the thing about Bruno Silva is, when he's the one getting pressure, does he struggle in fights? Yes, he can. But when he's the guy moving forward and throwing those vicious hooks, he does have a lot of success. And I'll be very curious to see if Silva goes to the body in this matchup, because I think that will be open, especially for some of his boxing combinations. And if Nam is using that high guard, moving his feet very well, I think the body shots will be open. So again, there's a part of me that wants to pick the technique of Tyson Nam, but this is a really fun fight to open the card. That's what I've been saying. Like, for a fight night card, a free card on a Saturday to open with Carlston Harris versus Abubakar Nurmagomedov and Tyson Nam versus Bruno Silva, that's a pretty good free card to have.
The guy picked up 2 bonuses and then decided to ride off into the sunset, now fighting Tyson Nam. But if you look at it for Bruno Silva, the best part of his game with that right hand is he can blend in his combinations, and you watch him feint the jab to then throw the right hand, and he had a right cross knockdown against JP Bays. He hit him with an uppercut that knocked him down, and then the last one was a straight right hand that was able to get it done. And against poor Victor Rodriguez, I mean, overhand right, got it done, but it was that double pump feint, and he did it 3 times. He did double pump feint, reset, double pump feint, reset, and then he was able to land that knockout blow. So you have a look at the odds in this one. Bruno Silva is favored to get the win. Tyson Nam, the underdog. We have a look at the Topology vote. Surprise to us, they are to you. I'm going to say the fans going with the younger fighter on a 2-fight win streak. I'm going to say over under 67.5% Silva.
I think they'll be under. I think it'll be a really close vote.
I think it's going to be close. It's the opposite.
Wow.
619 total votes. 71% Nam. 46% by decision, 48% by knockout for the 29% that have Silva, 60% by decision. So the fans are going with Nam, who's the underdog.
And I get it, you know?
Who are you going with here?
Like I just said, like, I get it. I feel like a pick for Tyson Nam is not a foolish pick by any means, but I do find myself keep on going back to, well, Tyson Nam might have a bit of the counter for what Bruno Silva does, but I do see Silva being the advancing fighter, and I do think he will land more damaging shots. Now, if Tyson Nam wins a decision based on volume, I'm okay with that, but I do think Bruno Silva is going to slightly edge out this fight, but he needs to be a little bit more active, because again, if you make a 3-fight win streak and you cap that off with a win over Tyson Nam, you are bound to get a big matchup your next time out there, so it would be nice to see Bruno Silva get back in there in 4 or 5 months if he is able to get the win.
Well, and he gets to do the reverse Uno and go, y'all must have forgot, because I mean, just like Roy Jones punching the water in that pool, he can go out there, get that win against Tyson Nam. That's part of the music video.
It is.
But when it comes down to it, I'll go with Tyson Nam in this one. For Bruno Silva to get back after the time away, he had fought some lesser guys when he made that UFC debut at UFC 243. It started off a giant card. There were 57,000 plus people at Marvel Stadium
that must have been
for that card, and Silva gets dropped in the first round. Nam is one of those guys that cuts the cage with hooks, and against a guy like Bruno Silva advancing with those different right-hand combinations, I can see Nam picking up the success there. So I'll go with the underdog. We're split on the pick.
on the first 2.
I've got Tyson Nam, Matt going with Bruno Silva. Some big-time fights on this card. 14 total, headlined by, ooh boy, it's Petr taking on
What a great name.
Merab Dvalishvili. Some great fights. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it. Coming up this weekend with 59 total fights between them, we have a couple of bantamweights looking to make moves like old Cougs when it comes to closing time. Tony Gravely taking on Victor Henry. They're going to look to lean on that experience and pick up something big. And when you look at both of these guys, Matt, for Victor Henry, I'd say in his UFC debut, he overachieved. He took on Raoni Barcelos, and he fought like he's never fought before. He went out there and put on a performance for the ages and outstruck Raoni Barcelos and threw volume like we had never seen. And for Henry and for both of these guys, champions on the regional scene. Henry was a former deep champion over in Asia. He fought some of the world's best. And outside of just fighting with Deep and fighting with some of those different organizations, Pancrase, another one, you look at the names on the resume. He beat Albert Morales to get that shot in the UFC, which was on short notice. He beat Masanori Kanehara, a guy who's a champion over with Ryzen right now. He beat Kyler Phillips by split decision. Beat Yuki Motoya to win that Deep belt. Beat Anderson Dos Santos, who ended up in the UFC. And the one win that I wanted to talk about, he beat Masakatsu Ueda, a guy who had a win over Kyoji Horiguchi in his career as well. So some really, really big names, even though Ueda beat him after that fact. Some giant names on that record for Victor Henry. He's a grappling ace. He really did get it done. He was one of those guys that had good offensive wrestling, but if you took down Victor Henry, you really had to worry about his sneaky, slick submissions. And for Henry, he found his groove against Barcelos with the strikes. He was a giant underdog in the fight. He came in a giant favorite against Raphael Assuncao, who had dropped many fights. And we know Assuncao for getting up to as close as, well, he's ranked number 3 in the division at multiple points when he took on Marlon Moraes, when he took on TJ Dillashaw in the rematch. And for Victor Henry, I mean, Assuncao just decided, well, I went to Extreme Couture for this camp. I'm going to throw veteran Savi out there. And Henry didn't have any of those things that he had in that Barcelos fight. So for Henry, CMMA protege, he's the, team captain at that gym, for Weber Almeida. Recently, Eric Gonzalez cross-trained there who fights in the UFC. So Victor Henry, great lineage, great gym. That's a Josh Barnett gym. And I want to see more of what I saw in that Barcelos fight. He left me wanting more.
He definitely did.
And when you look at Tony Gravely, an App State guy. He was a D1 wrestler there. He was a 2-time Virginia high school wrestling champ before he really transitioned to college and then MMA. Tony Gravely had an extensive amateur background. He had an extensive time with King of the Cage, CS, and multiple organizations before landing a Contender Series and now the UFC. For Gravely, overachieved in certain points, underachieved in certain fights, but now we're here with two guys that are on the fringe of the rankings in a loaded bantamweight division. And you heard it, Joe Rogan and Daniel Cormier last weekend. This is now all of a sudden kind of their premier division. So they've really kind of been getting that finger to the pulse.
Is it your favorite division right now?
I
think lightweight for me is still the best. Because for me, lightweight has the names to go along with the talent. But again, it's just personal preference at this point.
It is really difficult to try and guess. For me, I'll say it. Yeah, bantamweight is the best division.
Bantamweight's deep AF. Bantamweight goes 25 deep and anybody could beat anybody. So again, if you say bantamweight, I'm not going to disagree. Featherweight's on fire too right now. You ever heard about welterweight? There's so many great divisions right now that are so deep with such great talent.
If you just said what you said to us and to me, to some random person on the street, featherweight is great right now. Welterweight is too. They would think that you're a crazy person. But when it does come down to this one, and where I really do cap this off, it's closing time. Time for you to go out.
I know who I want to take me home.
And from the places you will be from, when it comes to Victor Henry, he's almost 36. When you look at it for Gravely, he's almost 32. I guess he's kind of in the middle there, a tweener between 31 and 32. But a lot of road miles on both of these guys. And we can break down all of the fights, we really can. You look at it for them, for Gravely, he's training for this one, an American top team. Adriano Moraes, Alessandro Pantoja, you've got Kyoji Horiguchi, so I'll throw the picture up there. Brazilian, he's a black belt in Taekwondo. His dad ran a Taekwondo school for years. But for Gravely, he'll pump the jab out there. He's got a great right hand with that overhand, a ton of power. He can tie you up, he can take you down, and already he's third all-time in the bantamweight division with 30 takedowns in 6 UFC fights. He had 11 against Simon Oliveira. Only Merab Dvalishvili and Ricky Simone have landed more takedowns in the bantamweight division than Tony Gravely. We're going to see if that plays out against Victor Henry, but a tough task, just like that Simon Oliveira fight was too, because Henry is very advanced with his jiu-jitsu.
He certainly is, and I do think the grappling is going to be a big component of this fight, and I do expect the majority of this fight to be contested on the feet, but I will say this, I do favor Gravely on the feet. I know we have seen Henry throw a lot of volume, but I still think the threat of the wrestling is going to open up some of the power shots for a guy like Tony Gravely, but it's weird that Gravely's getting a matchup like this against a guy who is almost 36, and I do get it to a certain point, because Gravely, to me, you hate to use this term, but I'm going to use it anyways. He's kind of a cleaner of the division. When Tony Gravely beats you, you probably have to go back, take some time off at least, and start to redevelop your game. Not to say he's a bad fighter by any means, but the majority of the time, Gravely's someone who should be fighting prospects, because we know what he excels at. You mentioned it. It's the right hand. It's the wrestling. Does he leave openings open for guys who are sort of that top-tier prospect to submit him, to out-volume him on the feet? Of course he does, but that's why I think this fight against Victor Henry is so fun, because like you had mentioned, Victor Henry, we got the best version of him in his UFC debut against Barcelos, and saying the worst version of him is harsh to Assuncao, because I don't think Assuncao is completely washed. Assuncao is still a very skilled
just struggles with right hands. Right hooks in particular.
This is my comp for Raphael Assuncao. He's the Ichiro Suzuki of the UFC. We can get more into that by the time we predict his fight. But for Victor Henry, I do favor his volume on the feet. I just don't know if he's going to be as confident in throwing those shots with the threat of a guy like Tony Gravely's wrestling going underneath. So for Gravely, I do see those openings for a lot of his power shots, but it really comes up to him, because the best version of Tony Gravely mixes his striking and his wrestling extremely well. The worst version of Gravely throws his strikes from the outside, resets, and then goes for a takedown from the outside and gets countered a lot off that.
Victor Henry defended 6 of 7 Barcelos takedown attempts. Barcelos is a very good wrestler and good at jiu-jitsu, and he's an even better striker. Victor Henry landed 222 of 397 total strikes. I've never in my life seen Victor Henry put on a performance like that, and I've watched a lot of Victor Henry fights. I've seen him go out there against Kanehara, struggle with the takedown defense at the start of the fight, get his back taken, and then rally in the second round with his striking and his jiu-jitsu. So for Henry, I love the package. For Tony Gravely, same thing is done, but like the old Cougs, will they be about that package? We'll find out in the matchup, Matt. When you look at the odds, Henry is slightly favored. Again, he was roughly a plus 375 underdog against Barcelos and a 4-1 favorite against Assuncao. So it's been peaks and valleys with those. Now they're trying to reset it. Gravely's last time out lost to Javid Bashrat, who shares some similarities with a guy like Victor Henry. Before that, 2 big wins over Simon Oliveira. Johnny Munoz Jr. dropped him on that quick in-between when Munoz is trying to change levels. If you look at it, a fight of the night in the UFC for Gravely against Brett Johns. You want to see scrambles, brother? That's the fight. And a performance bonus over Anthony Burchak, a guy who's very adept at the grappling. So again, odds slightly favor Henry. The underdog is Gravely. We look at the fan vote on this one, and I bet people are left scratching their heads. I know I am. I'm going to say over under 55% Henry because he's the favorite.
I think it's under.
I don't have a good gauge on it. You're going to say it's under. All right. So we have a look. And it's over. 612 total votes. 63% Henry. 87% by decision. For the 37% that have Gravely. 81% by decision. It's CMMA versus ATT. Coast to coast. It's like B.I.G. and Tupac, but not quite. Matt, when you look at this matchup...
I have a rap reference too for this.
I mean, what's the pick and what's the rap reference?
Do you like 50 Cent?
I love the walkout to 50 Cent last weekend. I'm not a 50 Cent fan.
Hate it or love it, the underdog's on top.
Oh,
I got Tony Gravely in the matchup. I do think his wrestling, again, I worry about him leaving his neck open for submissions. That's something we brought up in every single prediction video we have ever talked about with Tony Gravely. I'm kind of surprised neither one of us have mentioned it up until this point, but I still think the wrestling is going to be enough of an X factor for him to be able to open up with his striking. Now, I worry about the volume a little bit, but like you had mentioned, Victor Henry had never fought like that up until Raoni Barcelos, and I feel like Barcelos, for him, I've mentioned this a lot of times, we kind of talked about it with Carlston Harris, he came to the UFC and got into his prime maybe a little bit too late in life. So for Barcelos, it could have just been an off night for him, and that's why Henry looks so good. So for where the odds are at, for what I've known out of Tony Gravely's skill set, I do like Gravely in this matchup.
And you do have it like really close in terms of height and reach with both of these guys. And for Victor Henry, it's the great reset because you went too far with Barcelos and then he won. Then you tried to get him a win over a former guy who's just at the top for the longest time in Assuncao. And he doesn't get it done. So now we're kind of here against Tony Gravely. So you get to figure out the playing field for both of these men. I have Tony Gravely as well as the underdog in the matchup.
Let's go, Craig.
For me, it's with the wrestling. It's a tough fight when you're trying to offer up a prediction because Henry, he's got the counter with the defensive jiu-jitsu. He's great with his offensive grappling. His volume's been there in certain fights. Not just the Barcelos fight, but we'd never seen that out of him before. So it really is a difficult one to try and give you a really accurate pick and prediction on it. Hopefully you enjoyed the preview. Both of us with Tony Gravely in the matchup. And listen, 14 total fights out there on this card, headlined by Jan versus Dvalishvili in this division. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Coming up this weekend, win, move on, lose, go home. In the flyweight division, we have JJ Aldrich taking on the queen of violence, Ariane Lipski. And for both of these women in their last respective fights, they were both finished. Albeit JJ Aldrich lost to the now number 3 ranked divisional darling, Erin Blanchfield. Had a good first round against her. And Ariane Lipski had a weird reshuffling of a fight that was due at 125, but it was up at bantamweight against Priscilla Cachoeira, who's still unranked, and she got finished in that fight and didn't really look like her normal self in that one either. So Lipski's trying to get back on the hump. And if you look at it for Ariane Lipski, at one point in her career, KSW 42, Mateusz Gamrot, he's a champ. Tomasz Narkun, he's a champ. Poster has both of them in the challengers, and in the middle, with a ray of light, it's Ariane Lipski with the belt. She was a poster athlete with KSW. She was a reigning, defending champ there, and in that fight, well, she had already beaten Diana Belbizia to win the title. She defended it twice. The last defense against La Malvada, Silvana Gomez Juarez in a wild fight. And then Lipski ends up in the UFC. And now at this point, Matt, not going off all that great. And that's kind of the crazy part. Lipski right now is at the same point that she was at when she started her pro career, because Lipski started off 2-3 in professional MMA with fights against Diana Turcado, Gisele Moreira, and Diana Firmino. And all of those women are very, very good. So
Exactly.
tough competition when you start. But if you look at it for Lipski in the run in the UFC, consider it, she's a KSW champ. She comes in and she loses to Joanne Wood. Well, that's definitely a litmus test.
Exactly.
And Wood at that point was still quite credentialed.
Crafty vet.
She loses to Molly McCann. She beats Isabella De Padua. She beats Luana Carolina. Loses to Shevchenko. Loses to De La Rosa. Beats Berm. And then loses to Cachoeira. The craziest part about it is, if you look at it for Lipski, she beats De Padua, who comes in on short notice. She mops her. That's De Padua's only fight in the UFC. Go back to the regional scene. She beats Luana Carolina, who is a decent UFC fighter to this point. She's 3-2 in the UFC. That was a contender for 2020 submission of the year, was that knee bar. And she was mean about it. She stood up and let out a primal yell, and she gets the win. Then she loses to Shevchenko. She beats Mandy Berm, who's 0-2 in the UFC to this point. So the wins haven't been against the greatest level competition. The losses are to fighters who were at one point ranked or could have been ranked, except for Priscilla Cachoeira. So now it's weird because Lipski has a great reset. And for JJ Aldrich, the highs have been highs, some of the lows have been lows. Her last fight out, we can really break it down skill for skill, shot for shot against Erin Blanchfield, but she got submitted, standing guillotine choke. Aldrich, forever Colorado, grew up there, trained there, elevation fight team with some of the best women that you're going to find in these divisions that she trains with. But Matt, it's a tricky fight because JJ Aldrich fights on a line and Ariane Lipski has the peaks and valleys. And it's tough to try and offer a prediction on peaks and valley fighters.
I have no idea how Lipski wins this fight, if I'm being completely honest. I don't like being one-sided in all of my analysis, but this is the thing about Aldrich that I really do like. She's good defensively. Really across the board. Like, she keeps her hands up, which is pretty important. She throws good volume, I would say. It's nothing over. She's not Max Holloway on the feet or anything, but she has good boxing, I would say. Good defensively, keeps the hands up. Is difficult to take down and doesn't eat power shots. If you're Lipski, I don't think the big flurries are really going to work on the feet. I don't think the kicks are going to work because Aldrich does do a good job moving forward with her attack. And the thing is, it's very difficult to throw kicks when you're moving backwards. Yair Rodriguez is a once-in-a-lifetime athlete, guys. Like, he doesn't come around all that often. So for Lipski, if she is able to use those Tony Ferguson front kicks, I think it could work very well for her because Aldrich is someone who doesn't use a lot of kicks. But again, her boxing is at the forefront of her game. So I do expect Aldrich to have the better offense with the volume and to be better defensively. So for me, I struggle to see how Lipski wins other than her being able to go out there and get a finish or a big action throughout this fight because the Queen of Violence is her nickname, but I think it's fair to say that we have not seen the Queen of Violence in a meaningful period of time.
She looked pretty good in the 2021 win against Mandy Berm. She was pushing a pace.
Is it fair to say, though, I think JJ Aldrich would probably beat Priscilla Cachoeira. I think she beat Montana De La Rosa, even though it'd be a close fight, but I think her defensive wrestling's good enough. Not saying I'm right just because I said it, and I do think she beat Antonina Shevchenko just because Shevchenko's all over the board.
And originally, this fight was actually booked for last year. This time last year, Lipski withdrew, and then you had Aldrich going out there and beating Jillian Robertson.
My whole thing about JJ Aldrich is, to me, remember how we used to say for the longest time, Dustin Jacoby was the 16th ranked light heavyweight? Like, hey, if you're going to be ranked, you beat him, and if you lose to him, you're not going to be ranked. Aldrich is that fighter to me, and I just struggle to see Lipski having a complete enough game to really make it into the rankings.
Well, I mean, for Aldrich, 7-4 in the UFC. She came in on the Ultimate Fighter season 23, got a win, then got finished by Tatiana Suarez, who to this point still, undefeated. But if you look at it for Aldrich, she's been fighting since 2010 as an amateur debut with Rocky Mountain Bad Boys, the promotion. So 7-4 UFC. Again, you go through the record. She does have that last win against Jillian Robertson. She outstruck Erin Blanchfield, looked really good at the boxing in the first round. Blanchfield then was able to close that distance. Got that submission win as it went on. She has good counter wrestling in general, does JJ Aldrich. Her boxing can be up and down when she gives up distance. She's actually a negative striker in terms of numbers in the UFC. 4.05 significant strikes landed per minute to 4.54 received. Negative 0.49 strike differential in the UFC. The favorite is Aldrich, open minus 145. She's about a minus 250 favorite. Lipski open plus 125, plus 200 right now. Pretty rich for unranked women's flyweights. You have a look at the Topology votes. Matt, surprised us there to you. I'm going to say over under 75% Aldrich.
I would say over.
You've been pretty one-sided. 649
I've done a
total
good
votes.
job up until now.
74% Aldrich, 26% Lipski. I too think Aldrich is going to win the fight. However, if Lipski can be the advancing party, landing the bigger shots in the flurries and then backing off and not giving Aldrich the time to set back up and get into a rhythm, Aldrich is a rhythm-based fighter. And if you can break her out of that, you can kind of beat her at times. So for Lipski, she can go out there, land those front kicks, land the teep kicks, and change things. And when you look at it for the grappling, as good of a defensive, wrestling specialist, I guess you could call JJ Aldrich, because you don't see her go out there for a lot of takedowns. Courtney Casey fight, maybe, but you don't see that at the forefront of her game. If Lipski's going to be able to go out there, counter some of that, utilize her grappling skills, she herself training at ATT with some of the best women in the world. So both these women from power gyms for their respective, game plans that we've seen so far. I like JJ Aldrich out of the steadiness, but again, peak and valley fighters are really, really hard to try and offer up a prediction on.
It's a terrible comparison, but I'm going to make it. Aldrich to me is like Russell Westbrook. Like, the floor is raised for your team if you have
JJ Aldrich could be an MVP.
No. But Aldrich, the thing about Westbrook is, if he's on your team, your floor is going to be high because at least he's going to go out there and get like a 30-point triple-double. The problem is the ceiling won't be all that high because once you make it to the playoffs, other guys out there are going to be able to out-ISO him in close games, and the other superstars of the league are going to be able to outplay him in those situations. For Aldrich, I just see her as someone who has a high floor but not a high ceiling because again, she's good defensively pretty much across the board. And you bring up she is a negative striker, but the one thing is her strikes landed per minute are quite high. They are above the UFC average, and I do think that her with her output is going to have quite a bit of success against Lipski, who does have a very high guard, tends to be a little bit more defensive on the feet until she can really land some of those powerful counter shots. Again, I can admit this in every UFC video we've ever done. I feel like I'm slightly higher on JJ Aldrich than most people are, but I just give her the respect that she deserves because again, she's a tough fight for anybody in the division. I don't think she's going to go out there and beat Valentina or anything like that, but again, she can defend takedowns, she's hard to hit clean, she's going to offer you a difficult fight no matter who you are.
Matt, a very difficult fight to offer that prediction up. Both of us going with Colorado's JJ Aldrich to get the win. Some big fights on this card. Volkov-Romanov in the co-main event in the main, Jan versus Dvalishvili. Can't wait for it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Bantamweight banger coming up on the prelims. We have Argentinian Ninja. It's Guido Cannetti taking on the MMA Lab's own Mario Bautista. And if somebody in Argentina or Latin America haven't made a movie about this guy's life, you better acquire the rights. Like, go out there right now by www.guidocannettislifestory.com. And you're probably fixing for a payday because this guy right now, at age 42 last year, picked up 2 giant wins and sent 2 guys packing from the UFC. He beat Chris Mutino by standing TKO. He beat Randy Costa by submission early on in the fights in the first round. And Guido, the coach at Our Town MMA back home in Argentina, just continues to put it on. I'll throw it up there, a clip of Guido going out there, lifting weights, kicking the crap out of his coach's, guard. He's going out there, hitting the heavy bag, and then doing it all over again. Guido is a physical specimen at 43.
I would give up 6 inches of my height to look like him when I'm 43.
And the craziest part about it is, Matt, we touched on this in videos. At 34, Guido was on The Ultimate Fighter. He lost 2 fights on The Ultimate Fighter. You lose 1, usually go home. He lost 2, and they went, you know what? We like this guy. They put him on the finale, which was UFC 180. He lost that fight. He loses 3 fights in a row, and they went, hey, you want to fight a UFC 190? Yeah, and then he goes out there and wins. If you consider it, Guido Cannetti, after the age of 34, started off at 2-5 in the UFC, and none of the 2 guys that he beat stuck around. So it was just crazy to see that. The last 3 losses to Guido going into this win streak. Marlon Berry gets submitted.
One of the best fighters in the world.
Bacaridana, where Guido showed those kicks at the start, and then he got knocked out. And a split decision loss to Mana Martinez, where Guido started out really well, which was kind of a story of his career, and then he faded as the fight went on. And Mana had the extenuating circumstances. Exactly. His coach had just passed away.
I thought Mana won that fight, to be fair. I don't know what you would score.
They shuffled it, but for Guido, the last 2 wins over Chris Mutino, over Randy Costa, giant wins. And the other part about Guido's overall career arc and the resurgence is he's been an underdog in every single UFC fight, which he is in this one as well. So it's just crazy to see all of this. He rallied Argentinians around him. And the craziest part about it is right now, think about Argentinian MMA. Guido Cannetti's 43 and having success. Santiago Ponzinibbio is in the later stages of his 30s. He's having success. The younger fighters like Francisco Prado, Eileen Perez, and then, of course, we did see it here recently, and it was just, last weekend we had a young Argentinian coming in, former champ, who did not have success. Guido's leading the charge. You think about athletes after 40, Matt, and I think of the rare circumstances like
Yoel
Romero, Tom Brady, Nolan Ryan,
Randy
Guido
Johnson.
Cannetti. Like, these are guys after 40 having success. So good for Guido Cannetti.
Fun fact, I have a friend who recently went to Buenos Aires, Argentina, said it was the most beautiful place they have ever been to and that the people were nothing but lovely. So shut up, Buenos Aires. Here's the thing about Guido Cannetti, though. It feels like at 43, he just realizes what he is at this stage of his career. Like,
I think he always did.
But yes, he has to come in with a big storm, but you kind of realize that at 43. So I guess you're right, but he's more set in his ways. I think that's fair to say. Like, if he's going to go out there and get a finish win, it's probably going to be in the first round. Is he going to fall off after that first round? Yes, I think that's fair to say. And Mario Bautista, because I feel like we spent a lot of time talking about Guido Cannetti, Mario Bautista is an interesting fighter, because recently you would probably think that the grappling is at the forefront of his game, because he has looked really good with the submissions as of late, but this guy has big power in his hands when he is able to land it, and I really like some of the boxing technique of Mario Bautista, but he reminds me of a lot of guys who are fresh to the NBA. You guys know how much I love basketball. He reminds me a little bit of like a Jalen Green. Like, he's great offensively, but gives up a little bit defensively because of it. Mario Bautista, when he's throwing his combinations, he's not a guy who, when he throws the right hand, keeps the left hand tucked by his face like a Dustin Poirier or like even a Jalen Turner, who's a great boxer in his own right. Mario Bautista is a guy who will throw some flurries a la almost Cody Garbrandt, and that does leave him open in some of his fights, but that's why I do like this test for Mario Bautista. He's looked good as of late, but he still needs to really solidify himself as a legit contender in the division, and I'm not saying beating a guy like Guido Cannetti is going to really prove you as such, but that's a good win to have on your resume.
And if you look at it for Bautista, he comes into the UFC and takes on Corey Sandhagen. And it was a wild first round, like a quick takedown, and then Sandhagen drops him, gets a takedown, Sandhagen gets a finish. But a fight of the night against Jinsu Son, a performance bonus against Miles Johns, where he's the underdog and he knocked him out.
Johns is good.
Then he gets finished by Trevin Jones, which is wild, just where Trevin Jones is at in his career. He beats Jay Perrin, beats Brian Kelleher, beats Benito Lopez. Those all last year for Bautista. So he is absolutely rolling. And for Cannetti, like, if you just threw up a highlight tape, if they wanted to list 3 good things about Guido Cannetti, I'll list 3. Roundhouse kick to the body, inside leg kick from southpaw, lead hook, and those are the things that Guido does well.
Handsome for 43.
And you can take those to the bank. For Bautista, it's boxing combinations, utilizing his 69-inch reach, which might sound weird because he doesn't have a much longer reach than Cannetti, but with Bautista, it's a long jab to set up the right cross, or he throws it from an overhand position. And Bautista can be lights out with his own grappling. And you know the MMA lab for Sean O'Malley that we'll touch on later. You know him for, of course, Benson Henderson, who has a fight this week over with Bellator. I love a smooth Benson Henderson fight. But for Bautista, it's all the parts and parcels to his game, and then mixing in the power shots, not leading with the power shots like a guy like Cannetti will tend to do. But when you're 43 and you know what your muscles are like, you go out there and you shoot the lights out. So I love this fight.
Like, I'm 24 and I'll play basketball sometimes and feel sore the next day. I don't feel old by any means age-wise, but I still don't feel like I used to. So I couldn't imagine being in the UFC at 43.
Guido Cannetti probably gets diamond hard when he goes on the UFC's
excuse
the when you look at the all-time ranks, because Cannetti 5th all-time in bantamweight strike accuracy at 55.5%. Guido Cannetti just bringing the bacon home for Argentina.
But you don't need that blue pill.
He's a giant underdog in the matchup, which actually, before we started taping, I write them down individually, so I don't look at the odds, and I went, wow, I can't believe he's that big of an underdog. Bautista, a giant favorite. We have a look at the topology votes, Matt. Surprised to us they are to you. Sometimes Bautista gets clipped in the first round. That's why it kind of weirds me out. I'm going to say over, under. If they're that crazy, I'll say 85% Bautista. They're probably still over. Oh, wow. So 645 total votes, 96% Bautista, 56% by submission. For the 4% that have Cannetti, 40% by knockout. Cannetti against Moutinho. Goes out there, clips him, wobbles him. Moutinho back up against the fence, and not that long before, he had the O'Malley loss. It was supposed to be a reset for Moutinho, taking on an older guy on a 3-fight losing streak. It was not that. Then, Cannetti goes out there against Randy Costa. Costa, decent favorite in the matchup. Costa starts with the strikes. Cannetti, inside leg kick, body kick. And then, just like the fight with Terrence McKinney and Fares Ziam, it's a leg kick that then Costa gets wobbled. Cannetti just rushes, jumps on the back, no hook rear naked choke with Cannetti like a younger brother on the back, just like way up, and he was really far ahead on that choke, but he gets the rear naked choke, gets the tap, Costa out of the UFC. So Cannetti looking to move forward on all of that. I think Bautista has all of the skills that you see out of a guy like Cannetti. Turned up, the youth factor on his side, that it doesn't matter. Age is but a number for a guy like Guido Cannetti. He tends to slow down as the fights go on, though, historically. So for me, I like the reservedness of a guy like Mario Bautista, though you will see those blitzes, those crazy flurries. And the thing about Bautista is, even in the fights where he doesn't win by flying knee knockout, he likes to set it up and then throw it as well.
Exactly.
So you have to look out for the flying knee knockout out of a guy like Bautista. But I'll take his steadiness over, again, and I've said it a couple times so far, the peaks and valleys out of a guy like Cannetti.
This is what I like out of Cannetti. And honestly, shout out to you, because I feel like you called
I've been hot on
fights.
Cannetti in every fight.
Yeah, you've been right on him more often than not. But I think it is fair to say, this is a step up in competition that Guido Cannetti has probably deserved. But he was in a pretty good spot, just kind of being that bottom feeder in the division. Just, hey, if a guy seems to be on his way out, we're not really sure about him as a prospect. You fight Guido, and if you beat him, you can stay. If you lose to him, you're not really around. I don't think Mario Bautista is that guy by any means. I think he has shown that, hey, the Trevor Jones fight was just an off night for him, and his skills are very high level. That's the thing about Bautista. If he hadn't shown the submission ability that he recently has, maybe you could see a world where Guido could be able to go out there, wrestle him early, get him tired, and then make it interesting on the feet. But Bautista is such a talented striker, and with his own submission ability, that I do like Mario Bautista in the match.
And I said this about Brennan Allen when he was taking on Andrea Muniz. Lots of success against southpaws at the UFC level. For Mario Bautista, they might not list them as exact southpaws, but Corey Sandhagen, southpaw. Now, I know he lost that fight, and he lost it in the first round. Glimpses. Jay Perrin, switch fighter. Brian Kelleher, switch fighter. Lopez, Benito Lopez, and that was the last win off a really long layoff. Southpaw fighter, switch fighter as well. And a true southpaw was Trevin Jones, where Bautista did get finished, and that's where it kind of peters off a little bit. But a really good fight, Matt. Two high-level guys and high-volume guys, and they really like to burn hot in the first round, too, so you guys should really enjoy this. Both of us going with MMA Lab's own Mario Bautista to get the win. I can't wait for it. Maybe I'm the most excited person in the entire world for Bautista Cannetti. You know I'm excited. But some big-time fights in this division. In that main event, Jan versus Dvalishvili. Can't wait for it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. And a welcome to the UFC to middleweight finisher, the Reaper. It's SD Sedriques Dumas taking on Josh Fremd, the collegiate wrestler. And I'll get into his wrestling pedigree, though you might not see him on D1 posters. He's not Bo Nickel. He did go far with it. When you look at this matchup, Matt, it was announced on February 23rd by Team Iridium that out was Abu Zaitsar, in is Josh Fremd, the former LFA middleweight title challenger. And he didn't win that belt against Gregory Rodriguez, but he did win some big fights after that. He picked up a big win over Joel Bauman, who came out throwing everything in the kitchen sink in that fight. You do have Fremd going out there, getting the submission win about a year ago, and that was at the start of 2022. So Fremd looking for his first win in about a year. He lost in the UFC to Fluffy Hernandez, got kind of out-wrestled in that matchup. His last time out, he nearly had his head popped off like a daisy against Trayshawn Gorin, one of the most disgusting submissions you'll ever see. And now for Fremd, he was 9-3 going into the fight against Gore, who was 3-2. And now Fremd has to take on another up-and-comer in Dumas, who's undefeated. And it is a tricky one, because for Dumas, over on Contender Series, take on Mateus Peñas, and that was a weird fight because Peñas, 23-3 as a kickboxer, he had all the knockout wins. Peñas was slightly favored to win the fight. I thought Peñas was going to win the fight. And Dumas went out there and put it on him and looked amazing. He really did show his complete arsenal, because for Dumas, what's he good at? The striking's good. Offensively. It's good defensively. His wrestling's good offensively. His submission ability's good offensively. His wrestling defense isn't the best, but for Dumas, he's good at getting out of bad positions. He shows a lot of heart and toughness in these fights. And I don't know where his ceiling is in the UFC, but it doesn't matter, because now he gets to go on against a tough enough test in Josh Fremd. We saw Fremd go out there, finish Bruno Oliveira in that 4-man tournament with the LFA to then book his shot against Gregory Rodriguez, and that was a string of 3 straight main events with the LFA. It was Oliveira, it was Rodriguez, and then it was Renato Valente, and a win there too for Fremd. So a big matchup for both of these guys, a reset for Fremd, a litmus test for Dumas, and that's what makes it fun in a middleweight division that's kind of all over the place these days.
It really is. That's the weird thing about the middleweight division. We can applaud divisions like the lightweight and the bantamweight division for being deep, basically down to their top 25, really 45 if we want to be honest. But the middleweight division doesn't really have that luxury. We were kind of joking last weekend on our Fight Companion about, hey, it's kind of wild how if Bo Nickel were to fight Alex Pereira, I asked you what the odds would be. You said, what, Pereira be like, what, a minus 165, 170? Isn't that wild that a guy making his UFC debut could have reasonable odds against the champion? And yes, I understand that there's a lot of specialists in this division, and that's what makes for so much fun, but I see this fight being very similar to what probably a Bo Nickel versus Alex Pereira fight would be. Can you get oil and water to mix? Yes, you can emulsify stuff if you spin it fast enough. I love to cook, so I do know that. But for the most part, no, it's impossible. One is going to stay on top of the other. And this really is one of those water and oil fights. Because for Dumas, Caesars don't fear the Reaper. He is very dangerous on the feet, and I love the hand speed that he shows at this division too, because he doesn't just have to load up on that one big shot to get the knockout win. He can put combinations together, mix his shots together, and he does what Dan Hardy always says. I'm going to give him his flowers every time I bring this up. He doesn't have to choose which punch he puts his power on in his combinations. He can make it the jab, he can make it the second punch, he can make it the fourth punch. It's very high level striking what Dumas is able to demonstrate inside the cage, but you brought it up. What does he struggle with? So far, the takedown defense has been a bit of a struggle for him, and I do wonder about how much time Josh Fremd is going to be able to get just holding Dumas against the cage, because I know that's not something that we want to talk about. It's not something that's going to make for an exciting fight, but Fremd, I do think, is going to have an advantage with the wrestling to the point where it might kind of cancel itself out, and it might make for a bit of a stale viewing.
Well, we'll throw in a little bit of a clip from our Contender Series fight from last summer, talking about Dumas in that matchup with Peñas, because I think it does hold a lot of water in this fight.
And for his opponent, SD Dumas, man, this guy blows people away. His striking's great. And the thing that I like, he can strike off the back foot. He can strike moving forward. He can strike moving sideways. He has so many different attacks. His kicks are great. I think his kick's one of the best parts of his game. And for SD Dumas, see, I do a lot of research for the show differently than I do for our, our full card UFC breakdown. So I do a lot more like reading articles, watching certain interviews. And for this one, I found an article on the UFC.com website. And the headline of this one, Matt, I said I was gonna talk about this, but I didn't tell you what it was. The headline is Sedriques Dumas, Time is Now, Dana White's Contender Series. This is by Walker Van Way. And you go down about 3 or 4 paragraphs. With the laid-back personality of a post-show Redman, the flash of Sean O'Malley, the thirst for blood of Robbie Lawler, and the power of a small vehicle, Dumas really doesn't have much adrenaline left for outside the cage. What? Like, is this guy hanging out with Redman post-show? Is this Walker Van Way? Does he know Redman?
Imagine just being like, this guy's pretty great at everything. And him reading that article being like, I guess. Like,
I better put spinners on my car and drive real slow now.
Now, when it does come down to it, like, you look at Dumas, all those pluses, the one slight negative, but you haven't seen it cause any issues. I guess the only other thing you could say was level competition coming into the UFC and Contender Series. When he was 6-0 taking on Peñas, it was over guys' combined record of 18-22, so not the greatest level of competition. He had fights with Icon FC, Gamebred, so Jorge Masvidal guy. He's out of Pensacola, Florida. You heard it on Contender Series, kind of a crazy life story. Dana White liked that when he signed him. But if you do look at it for Fremd, he wrestled at Slippery Rock University. And I went and I looked and I thought, okay, Slippery Rock University, I hadn't heard of it because Fremd is a Pennsylvania guy. That was where Stanley Sedriques, that's his alma mater. That was an Olympian right there. So Sedriques really putting the world on notice back in the 70s. Fremd out of that gym.
Say I knew that.
Part of the MMA team, a part of the wrestling team. And for Fremd, positive record, big fights on his record. And if you look at it, some decent blitzes in some of these fights. And he's able to withstand some of the blitzes. I know in the biggest fights he hasn't, but out of the Bauman fight, he was able to do it. And so on and so forth. So we have a look at the odds. Dumas is the slight favorite. Fremd the slight underdog. The reset fight, Fremd took this one on short notice on February 23rd. We have a look at the topology votes. Matt, surprised us there to you. Dumas, polarizing figure.
He is.
Very polarizing on the internet. I feel like the fans have him here, though. I'm going to say over under 70% Dumas.
I think it'll be over.
And it's way over. So 451 total votes, 91% Dumas, 71% by knockout. And for the 9% that are Fremd, 41% by decision, 31% by knockout. 91% on Dumas, and a lot by knockout.
I don't have that much on the Reaper, but I still think he's going to win this matchup. The problem with Fremd is he does leave himself open when he goes for some of his takedown attempts, and he leaves himself wide open for some of the uppercuts and knees from a guy like Dumas, and that's why I do favor him in this matchup. Now, again, I kind of mentioned it during the video. I could see Fremd going for a lot of some of those stalling techniques up against the cage because he does realize how dangerous of a fight this is going to be at range, but again, I do think at range he is going to eat some of those big damaging shots, and for that reason, I do have Dumas.
Yeah, and if you look at it for Josh Fremd, he's a little bit like Tim Duncan in his strikes. He doesn't go for the kill too much.
The greatest of all time?
He will be kind of like the big fundamental. He'll pop the jab out there. He'll throw the jab out enough that it then opens up his right hand. Threat of the takedown, clinch game, like a lot of fundamentals that you like to see out of Factory X Muay Thai. And Fremd's a guy that grew up, came up on that East Coast scene. Both guys really East Coast guys, but different parts of the East Coast. For Dumas, I like the power. I like the offensive grappling in a matchup like this. I like the size that he has for the division, even though, again, height-wise, they're pretty close. 2 inches in height, to Fremd. A little bit of a reach advantage either way, but I do like Dumas in the matchup. So both of us going with the Reaper, Sedriques, Dumas in the matchup. Should be a fun one. Let us know down below in the comment section who you have in the fight. Some big-time ones left on this card, including Jan and Dvalishvili in that main event. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it. The theater at the Virgin Hotels has been a site to a Christina Aguilera concert. That was the first one to open it up. A title fight last year between Jose Ramirez and Josh Taylor. Taylor, big winner in that one. He's going to be taking on Teofimo Lopez coming up in May. But listen, now you got a couple of old scrappy bantamweights looking to make their mark in front of that crowd off the strip. It's the former top contender, Raphael Assuncao, the former Ultimate Fighter contender, dangerous Davey Grant. And Matt, both these guys have had some big peaks and some big valleys in their careers. Now, it's been much more consistent for Assuncao, a guy who years ago on the regional scene beat Jorge Masvidal, and that was back years and years and years ago. And Assuncao, at one point, the third-ranked bantamweight, he had a win over TJ Dillashaw. He lost in the rematch, UFC 200. But if you look at it for Assuncao, after he loses to Dillashaw, he knocks off 4 wins, and then they make him rematch with Marlon Moraes, and he gets finished in that one, and that's where he started to hit the skids. Assuncao was a giant underdog his last time out against Victor Henry, and he out-savvied him. And for Assuncao, it was weird because he was an American top team guy, whether it was Atlanta or down in Florida. But his last time out, he switched up the camp to Extreme Couture. And then all of a sudden, he was able to find his groove back again. So for Assuncao, this camp again at Extreme Couture, some giant names at that gym in the lower weight classes. You'll see them. And Al Cop's one of those guys that's out there that we know and love here on the channel. But for Davey Grant too, that's kind of the crazy thing. SBG Bishop Auckland, he switched up the end of his camp in this one, and he loses on that season of The Ultimate Fighter, and it was tough 18. The guy that won it was one of the great what-ifs of all of MMA, Chris Holdsworth, injured in camp, undefeated pro amateur. But for Grant, we've seen all the performance bonuses in the UFC. Performance bonus over Martin Day, one over Jonathan Martinez. He goes out there and has the fight of the night against, now the last name is Adrian Yanez. It's been confirmed out there on Twitter by the man himself, so you got to call him that now. But the craziest part is, the last time we saw Davey Grant was back in May of last year, and we said at the start of the video, and the loser of this fight goes home. So it's just crazy to see that. It's a submission win for Davey Grant. Now all of a sudden, he's probably still in the position. The loser could very well go home out of a matchup like this.
I think if Assuncao loses, he might, but I do think they will give Davey Grant another chance.
At 37?
I do, and this is why. I think this fight, more than any other in UFC history, now, of course, there's a better example, but I'm just going to say that for hyperbole. This fight speaks towards, hey, age doesn't matter as much as in-cage miles do. And for Raphael Assuncao, he's 40, Davey Grant might be 37, but Davey Grant has not been hit by the level of shots that a guy like Raphael Assuncao has been at this stage of his career. And I know Davey Grant has been in difficult fights. I'm not here saying, hey, he's just blown through them all and they've all been a breeze, but Assuncao has been in difficult fights with some of the best fighters in the division for years now, and I do think it's fair to say that Assuncao has fallen off from where his prime originally was, whereas for Davey Grant, he just kind of fights in the same manner. I know the matchups might be different, and when he fights really good guys in the division, he might lose. When he fights guys at the lower end of the division, he's going to win. But the thing about Grant is he durable? Yeah, he's extremely durable, even at this stage of his career.
He's got a lot of scar tissue in his face.
He does, but he can eat big shots and not go down after he eats those big shots. He has great defensive submissions, and he does do a good job walking forward on his opponents when they're not throwing a lot of shots. And the thing about Assuncao is, the win that I always go to for Assuncao is the Rob Font win. I know it wasn't one that got a lot of headlines, but Assuncao kind of beat the brakes off him defensively in that fight, which is a weird thing to say, but he didn't get hit by any big shots, and in the third round, he really opened up with some of his own boxing, and I always think that Assuncao is still somewhere in there, but it is difficult to say at 40 years of age, and I know beating Victor Henry is a good getting back on the horse kind of a win, but I still think higher of Davey Grant. If you really ask me, if you give me that truth serum, who's probably better, Davey Grant or Victor Henry? Well, Davey Grant's been in there with some of the best fighters in the division, and even when he loses, makes a pretty good account of himself. And that's the thing about Grant that I do applaud. Even at 37, still a very durable opponent.
And Grant has about a month to get ready for this fight. It was announced on February 9th that Grant's going to replace Kyler Phillips in the matchup. So it would have been Assuncao trying to turn away a prospect. Now Davey Grant gets that opportunity against a former top-ranked contender. And the fight that I go back to for Raphael Assuncao was, he was ranked really high in the division. If I'm not mistaken, he was ranked third. And he was taking on a guy closer to the bottom. He was taking on Lopez. And Matthew Lopez is one of those guys. He went to the top of the mountain with the RFA. He had some stumbling blocks in the UFC. That was back when bantamweight wasn't where it is right now. But in that one, Assuncao goes out there, throws a lot of leg kicks, slows the movement of Lopez. Lopez can't move forward. And then, flying knee, throws that shot, crumples Lopez, and a great finish win for Assuncao. And that's it. He's had high highs, he's had low lows. And for Assuncao, 3-2 at WEC, 12-6 in the UFC, and he debuted at UFC 128. That's where John Jones won the belt against Shogun. And Assuncao lost handily to Eric Koch. I bet you didn't think you'd hear that name today. Eric Koch. The guy who, he had a lot of promise at one point. So Matt, in this matchup, Assuncao got back to basics his last time out, looked great. And in the fights that he was losing, like you look at the 4-fight losing streak, lose to Marlon Moraes, gets clipped by a right hook and dropped. He gets submitted, loses to Corey Sandhagen by decision, get blitzed from the outside. Garbrandt lands the most disgusting baseball bat knockout right hook you've ever seen in your life in the dying seconds of a round. And then against Ricky Simone, right hook to an uppercut, and he crumples up against the fence. It was a lot of similar shots that caused him issues in those fights. Dangerous Davey Grant also throws some crazy hooks in his matchups, and he likes to throw leg kicks as well, but some mean intent on those shots. And for Assuncao, it was number 4 versus number 3 in that Lopez fight. So Matt, Assuncao, what I like out of him in a matchup like this, and I talked about it earlier on in the card, he's one of those guys, Lopez fight, he did it. Feints. Throws a different shot.
I never thought that highly of Matthew Lopez, if I'm being honest.
Most people did. But for Assuncao, he's able to disguise his shots with a lot of feints, and he's a guy that can strike well on the back foot in these fights. Good defensive grappler. He offers up a lot of issues for a guy like Grant. Grant has a power equalizer. Grant tends to throw with high volume too, and he can keep a pace even for an older fellow in this division, but not a lot of miles on him. He had long bouts of inactivity. You remember that fight against Grigory Popov is one that kind of set things off. But you look at a matchup like this, Davey Grant, slight favorite, Assuncao, slight underdog. We have a look at the Tapology votes, Matt. Surprised us there to you. I think fans are going to think favorably of Grant's finish over Smolka. I'm going to say over, under 67.5% Dangerous Davey.
I think it'll be over.
I think it's going to be over. And it's slightly over. 607 total votes, 73% Grant, 75% by knockout for the 27% that have Assuncao, 82% by decision. You have Davey Grant in this fight.
I don't know, to be completely honest, because again, if Raphael Assuncao implements the wrestling, I do think he can hold Davey Grant down enough to actually win this fight by decision. But I go back to what I said about the Trevin Jones-Cody Garbrandt fight is, hey, does Trevin Jones have enough power to win this fight? Of course he does. He has great knockout power, but he doesn't give himself enough opportunities to land that one big knockout shot. And the thing about Assuncao is, Ricky Simone's a really good fighter. He's a very talented fighter. He's not a knockout artist by any means. Like, he's a good boxer, but he doesn't have big power in his hands by any stretch.
Recently. if you watch his fights.
Yeah, but Ricky Simón is not a big, powerful boxer. Again, it's a lot of the threat of the wrestling that then opens up his own striking. Again, he has made the improvements, but I don't think Ricky Simón is a powerful striker by any sense. Davey Grant gives himself enough opportunities, I think, to at least expose the chin of Assuncao. So I think Assuncao is well-rounded enough to win this by decision, but I do think Davey Grant at least gives himself enough opportunities to get a finish, and that's why I do have dangerous Davey Grant.
Well, like, you look at the fight of the nights against Yanez and then his rematch against Marlon Vera for Davey Grant, and those are blood and guts performances. So against a guy like Assuncao, you've seen Assuncao knock guys out. It doesn't happen every day. He does have a lot of wins by decision. So you look at this one, short notice turn for Davey Grant. He's training in the States for this matchup. I'm ever so slightly going to go with the underdog in Raphael Assuncao in the matchup. I think, again, back to basics, training with some of those top guys that you saw in the pictures at Extreme Couture. He can go out there, put on that veteran savvy one more time. But Matt, 40-somethings in the bantamweight division. Guido, Cannetti, and Raphael Assuncao. The boys are looking to turn back the clock. Some big-time matchups on this card and in this division. Petr Yan's taking on Merab Dvalishvili. You're not going to want to miss that main event. The rest of the fights on the card. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.
My name is Lukasz Brzeski.
An odd matchup coming up this weekend. A couple of heavyweights who aren't so heavy, with one making his UFC debut. We have Dana White's Contender Series contract winner, the U.S. Virgin Islands' own Carl Williams, and he's going to be taking on the Bull. And it's not John McDessie up a bunch of weight classes. It's Lukasz Brzeski, a very difficult name for us to pronounce here in North America. He had a really weird fight on Dana White's Contender Series. Was there a tap? Was there not a tap? He got a contract. Then he got that overturned to a no contest. You saw the complications. And a weird fight against Martin Budaj in Brzeski's UFC debut, where most people thought that he won, even though he didn't. So for Brzeski, it's the big reset. For Carl Williams, a big opportunity. And Williams coming on to Dana White's Contender Series. We talked about him a lot. Carl Williams, who's 6-1, and Jimmy Lawson, who's 4-1. This one at heavyweight. Now, originally, this was supposed to be a completely different matchup, and we weren't actually supposed to have Carl Williams in. Now, if you went over to his Instagram, I think it was on September the 4th, he posted that, I got a chance in the UFC. So he did weigh in at 233 pounds for this matchup. So you look at it that way. Lawson weighed in at 263. Both polar opposite fighters. And if you do focus in on it, the original matchup that Lawson was supposed to have was against not Kevin Stefanski of your Cleveland Browns. It was Kevin Zaflarski. Like a backup QB version of Kevin Stefanski. I know Carl Williams is coming in on short notice. He's out of the U.S. Virgin Islands. He goes to American top team Atlanta. He started out his athletic career in track and field, and then he kind of wanted to move into martial arts, so that's kind of what got him to the dance, wrestling, and then into MMA. I watched Carl Williams fight, Matt, and if he had like 2 more fights, I think he could have made it into the UFC as a light heavyweight, and I don't know why the PFL decided to pass on him from PFL Challenger Series, because Williams is an incredibly diverse striker, and by that, I mean, he throws somewhat basic combinations, but he has speed, he has power, his wrestling translates into MMA.
It definitely
he has
does.
Great control on the mat. Like, I really like the skill set I see out of Carl Williams, and I'm not making a pick on this one, but if Carl Williams won this fight, and listen, I don't even know, there weren't odds on this one earlier on today when I looked. Kind of surprised to see it here, and I think either winner, Williams is probably the more UFC ready, Lawson maybe
Probably the higher ceiling, I would say.
So Williams goes out there, 6 of his 8 pro fights at light heavyweight. He missed weight 1 time, but 6 of 8 at light heavyweight, 2 at heavyweight, and he takes on Jimmy Lawson, a premier wrestler from Penn State. Williams goes 3 of 3 on takedown attempts with 10 minutes and 54 seconds of control time and wins a decision, and it surprised a lot of people. Now, if you watch tape on Lawson, you knew his takedown defense was porous and he could get held down off his back. But a really impressive win for Carl Williams there. I'm just still surprised and kind of scratching my head that he doesn't go back down to 205 for this one.
It is kind of surprising. I guess you could say that for both guys, but not really. I mean, Brzeski is so big for he would be so big for 205 is what I mean to say. But but it is interesting. We have seen a current trend of smaller heavyweights really excelling in the division. I mean, we've talked about this a lot of newer guys coming in. They're kind of in that 220 to 240 range, less so in that 265, really pushing the scales. But you are right. Williams had a lot of success at 205, but he is fast for the division. That's something that has to be said. And we talked about this a lot when John Jones moved up to the heavyweight division. It was, hey, how is he going to transfer? How is he going to look? And I guess we don't have that much film to go off of. That fight was so quick. But for Williams, I do feel like he has a bit of an athletic advantage over a lot of the guys he does face in the division, because the one thing I really do like about his takedowns is the entries. They're so quick. He goes from being at that long range to the close range in a bat of an eye. So it will be really interesting to see how Lukasz does do at the range, because I'll be interested to see. Lukasz has a big advantage with not only the power, but the technique on the feet too. But it's going to be difficult for him to have confidence in his own strikes if Williams, every single time he sees strikes coming his way, just ducks underneath and starts going for some of those takedowns.
And Lukasz is such an interesting guy. For Brzeski, won on Contender Series last year. It's overturned to a no contest due to the presence of clomiphene in a drug test. He won that fight over Dylan Potter, who came in on short notice, and it was a fun fight. We all enjoyed it. But did Dylan Potter tap? Well, Mark Smith thought so. I didn't. My eyes didn't.
If Mark Smith was there, though.
Mark Smith saw the tap. I mean, Alistair Overeem felt the tap.
Okay, you were at home watching. Mark Smith was in the cage.
I saw every angle. He didn't tap.
Mark Smith was there. If he saw a tap, how can you disagree with it?
I disagree with it. For Lukasz Brzeski, a guy out of Poland, he's trained at so many different gyms, so many different great fighters. He obviously referenced Jan Blachowicz quite a bit when he was coming into the UFC. Obviously, sketchy circumstances over A, a controversial tap, but B, the no contest and the 9-month suspension after the fact. But when I break these two guys down stylistically, Matt, I can talk out of both sides of my mouth for both guys here earning victories inside of the octagon, and that doesn't happen every day. I love this fight booking. I think it's just, I think it's fair, and I think the fans are really going to like this one.
I'm really excited for Lukasz at the UFC level because, again, looking at his fights prior to this, there are some very nice skills that he can build upon once he does get to this level. I brought up a lot, we were talking before the camera started rolling. I love his ability to finish opponents up against the cage, not even just to finish them. I just like the scenarios he goes through, because how many fighters do we see? They get their opponent in a good position and they go buck wild. They don't really worry about their technique. They just get very overzealous with their style of fighting. We see this all the time. Then you look at someone like in last weekend's co-main event, for instance. Jeff Neal got Vicente Luque hurt, did not get wild at all. And Jeff Neal's someone who we've talked about a lot on this channel for just how intelligent he is with his finishing patterns. Look at how he did to Luque. Hurt him, hit him with 47 uppercuts.
Took the second round off and then just absolutely went motorboat in the third round.
He was Bangkok ready, that's for damn sure, in that third round. But what I like about Lukasz is, when he gets guys up against the cage, he's not just a headhunter. He's not someone who's just going to throw a lot of left and right hooks hoping for the finish. Go to the body. He will use his kicks effectively in this manner. For Lukasz, he does have submission wins, but they're not necessarily like, oh, he's Damian Maia. You know, I look at them a little bit more as like, maybe not even Carl Robertson. That's not a good example either.
Even when he was taking on Potter, the commentary was like, well, he's off to the side. He's not even on the back. It was like an AJ Dobson submission. He's on the side going for a rear naked. You think, well, that's not going to work at this level.
And you're probably going to agree with me on this. One of the first things I noticed with Lukasz, he's got to be so strong. Like, if you're fighting him, you have to be worried about every punch he throws, and you have to be worried about if he is able to dig underhooks. And I think underhooks, overhooks, not to sound like Dominic Cruz, one half of this weekend's main event, I think those will be very important in this fight.
So, in the matchup for Brzeski taking on Dylan Potter, he gets the win. It's controversial. Dana White, after the fact, said, I'm on the fence with Lukasz. Say what you want. He didn't tap. He wasn't getting out of that choke, so they ended up signing him regardless. He did get a win on the regional scene over Ednaldo Oliveira, who was in the UFC, fought Gabriel Gonzaga and lost to him. He had 2 fights he lost, and since then he's fought some guys. But for Brzeski, the level of competition, not really the greatest. He was also a minus 445 favorite over Potter. But what I did like out of Brzeski that I was able to see on the regional scene and in the fight against Potter, he starts every fight off by throwing 15 to 20 hard leg kicks. Closing the distance, throwing chopping calf kicks, and you like to see that. Softens up his opponent, and then he can get into his boxing. And Lukasz Brzeski, his boxing's really weird. It's not super technical. He does kind of like to throw his left hand out straight to just kind of like wing his right hand. There's a lot of power on it. He doesn't have good takedown defense, Brzeski, at all. Like that fight against Michal Kita, that's a guy that's fought a really good level of competition over on the Polish scenes. Doesn't matter the organization. He's fought a lot of guys that you know, that you love. You've seen Kita on some of those records. In that fight, Kita was able to really just ground out Brzeski.
He was.
Take him down, hold him up against the rage. And you might go, Craig, what's a rage? Have I heard of that before? Well, M1 Global used to have it. And Babylon also had it.
Can I be honest? It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
So if you've never heard of it before, picture this. If you're 6 feet tall, 5'11", 6'2", whatever, you can figure this out. If we're talking like my calf down, well, that's a chain link fence.
I would just say, look at a boxing ring. Up until the first rope, it is cage.
It's cage. It's like a baseball field. It's whatever you want to think. It's chain link. Above that, it's a ring. You can get a little creative, but not really. Do you train with it? Probably not, unless you're in some like underground whisper network in Europe. But I did look at that as Lukasz has great kicks, closes distance well, backs guys up, then he can work his striking attack, and he will go body, head. He will mix it up that way, and that's what I like out of Lukasz Brzeski, the bull. So in the fight that he had in his UFC debut, taking on the biggest heavyweight you're going to fight, Martin Budaj, and in that one, MMA decisions. 1 scored at 30-27, Drevski. 11 scored at 29-28 for Drevski. 1 scored at 29-28 for Budaj. Budaj wins the fight by unanimous decision. Drevski outshot Budaj 118-66 on significant strike attempts. So really weird that the fans go that way. The overwhelming strike numbers go Drevski's side. But when Budaj hits, he covers. You talk about covering distance. He's always in your face. Tough guy to fight. And he's had some really weird decisions, especially that technical decision fight against the Huggy Bear. That's Josh Copeland. But either way, a really, really tough fight against what's his name? Chris Barnett in that debut for Budaj. So if you do consider it, Drevski came in on Dana White's Contender Series 2021, an episode with Jazz Davicius, Jack Delange Lusa, Albert Duraev, and Jalton Almeida. So kind of interesting there. 50-50 striking always out of Drevski. And again, did he tap, didn't he tap? So Drevski in this one, Carl Williams, an interesting clash of styles, so to speak, in the matchup. The slight favorite is Williams, but he opened plus 145. Now he's minus 170. Drevski opened minus 170. He's plus 145.
I was surprised to see Williams open as the underdog because, again, 99% of the time, that might be a bit of an exaggeration, but when a guy with a wrestling advantage fights somebody who overcommits a little bit on their striking, but again, is a good striker, what happens? The wrestler ducks underneath the strikers, gets a takedown, and is able to accomplish it. So I was a little surprised just odds-wise seeing him open as the underdog.
And Drevski now out of this one, he fought out of Spartacus team at one point. He's fought out of some different gyms. He's a Polish man training out of Ankos MMA. And you see Marcin Tybor out of that gym. Exactly. You've seen a lot of big-name guys cross-train out of Ankos MMA. So great to see out of Drevski. We show it on and we throw it on over to Topology. Have a look at the votes over there. Surprise to us there, to you. I'm going to say over under on this one. Favorite probably shaded over under 67.5% Williams here.
I think it'll be over, actually.
Think it's going to be over? Oh, it's the opposite.
Wow.
631 total votes, 71% Drevski, 52% by decision, 40% by knockout. For the 29% that have Williams, 62% by decision.
Wow.
A surprise on the votes. The fans have the underdog, but the odds have switched, and yeah, that comes as a surprise to Fight Night Picks.
So I guess I'm going with the fan underdog, but the betting favorite in Carl Williams. Like you had said, I'm a little surprised to see him fight at the heavyweight division in the UFC, because a lot of the times what we see is a fighter will fight at their heaviest division on the regional scene. Then when they come to the UFC, oftentimes they'll go from like lightweight to featherweight, welterweight to lightweight. So it is a little bit surprising seeing Williams fight at this division, and I do think he will face some physicality issues, especially if he does stay around in the future. But I do favor him with the wrestling in the matchup, and I think his defensive striking will be good enough to at least let him get into the wrestling exchanges.
I know Drevski's last time out, he was able to keep that output, keep that pace as the fight went on. You don't see that out of a lot of heavyweights, so I commend him on that. I love to see it. Who's got a style that's more conducive to some wild fights? It's actually Drevski if you watch him fight. Drevski's one of those guys. You like the Trevor Peak punches? He'll end a combination and hit you with the inside of his fist and not like the end or where his knuckles are. So for Drevski, you got to watch out for that. The straight shots up the middle could cause an issue for Williams. I like Williams wrestling, not just the Williams or the Jimmy Lawson fight that we had seen, but you look at it for Drevski, and I mentioned it in the breakdown. His fight against Michael Kita, he struggled against the takedowns. Guy that you just saw fight for KSW, and Kita's fought everybody on the regional scene. But for Williams, I can see him going out there, sticking to the game plan. He's also a decent striker. We've seen that as well. So both of us in the matchup going with the UFC newcomer. Both guys looking to pick up their first UFC wins. We're going with Williams. previews. Let us know down below in the comment section who you have. Was Lipski the real winner against Budaj? I think he was, but we really want to hear from you down below in that comment section. Some big time fights on this card, including Volkov taking on Romanov in this division. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Sweden's Anton Turkalj made a list with Fight Night Picks that you don't want to make. He was at the bottom of the MMA nickname tier list. It's the Pleasure Man, Anton Turkalj, and he's making a second time out in the UFC, taking on Dana White's Contender Series Week 7 main eventer, Vitor Petrino, a guy who knows knockout finishes. And for Petrino, he rematched with Bellotto in that main event fight. The first time they fought, he knocked him out. The second time out, he knocked him out. But he withstood some adversity in that one. Won the majority of the first round. Straight shot through the guard. Sent Petrino down to the canvas. He followed it up. And at the end of the round, he was pounding away with ground and pound. The second round starts. He goes out there. He does more of the same. And he gets the finish. And for Petrino, you know him for that power. And if you look at his career, he fought a poor level of competition on the regional scene all the way up to the time that he fought Gadjimurat Antigulov, and he goes out there and finishes him. So a wild one, he takes him down, he does everything he needs to do to beat Antigulov, and then he ends up on Contender Series, gets the win, and the rest is history. But when you look at it for both of these guys, where Petrino didn't face a high-level competition, Turkalj was brought up the right way. Like 11-3 as an amateur, 2017 IMMAF European champion. He fought for the Asian Championships. He then fought for the European Championships again. And as a pro, he hadn't tasted defeat until he ended up in the UFC against Jailton Almeida. And we saw him withstand adversity on the regional scene. We saw him go out there and take on Acacio dos Santos on Dana White's Contender Series Week 1. He takes him down over and over and over again. But we don't remember him for that performance.
No, we don't.
We just remember B. Joe Pyfer because Dana White wasn't pleased by anything the Pleasure Man brought out. And Turkalj was high on himself. The pre-fight promo package was really, really high on himself. I got the look. I got the finishes. I've trained with Gustafsson and Shamaev for years. I'm ready for this. And it was a good win, but it wasn't the one that gets butts in seats.
Exactly.
So Turkalj, they give him the short notice call. A catchweight at 220, which most would have said, hey, just have him fight at heavyweight, but he goes out there against Almeida, gets taken down, gets submitted in that one. So, listen, water off a duck's back to me in a performance like that. But you look at this one, Matt, Turkalj with the striking, not to Petrino's level. Petrino, will he withstand the takedowns in this one? This is one of those Clash of Styles fights, and I'm really looking forward to it in the light heavyweight division.
It should be a great fight because I do think Turkalj can match some of what Petrino does on the feet. Like, I don't think this fight's going to be a complete wash in the striking. Yes, I do favor Petrino. I know that's what you're getting at, but again, I don't think it's just, if they're on the feet, Petrino's going to win all of those moments. I do think the fight will be somewhat close in some of those areas, but Turkalj is going to have an edge in the wrestling. But what Petrino did show, and I'm glad you brought it up in the Antigulov fight, was he can go for his own offensive takedown, and he's not some fish out of water on the mat. He is a decent grappler. Now, if Turkalj gets in that top position, of course I am going to favor him in a lot of those positions, in a lot of those moments, but I think this is going to be one of those fights where if Turkalj can't get the initial takedown, he's going to really struggle on the feet afterwards. But if he can get past Petrino's initial takedown defense and actually get him flat on his back, then we might see Turkalj actually get past the full guard, get into half guard, and land damaging shots. But the thing is, Petrino doesn't only have power on the feet, he has speed to match, and that's a very unique combination for the light heavyweight division. Now, both these guys are pretty big, and I would say both these guys are good athletes for the division too. They both have pretty good speed on the feet, they both have pretty good speed on their takedown entries, but I was very impressed by Petrino on Contender Series, and I was really impressed by what we saw on Contender Series as well, so I'm very interested to see what we're going to get at the UFC level, because at 25 years of age in the light heavyweight division, still a young guy for the division, and still has tremendous upside, and in a division that's as light open as light heavyweight, because you bring up Antigulov.
A division is light open.
Sorry, it's wide open as light heavyweight. You bring up Antigulov, it's kind of wild. Gadjimurat Antigulov was ranked after 2 wins in the light heavyweight division. Like, it really doesn't take that much to climb up all that fast, so for both these guys, this is a big opportunity on a huge fight night card.
And he fell like a sack of potatoes to Gadjimurat Antigulov. Flew too close to the sun. When you look at this matchup, Matt, for Turkalj, like, you've had some fights, and I went back and I watched some of the Brave fights, because you got to get into that mindset of what brought Turkalj to the dance. And so I go through it. He missed a kick against Konstantin Soldatov. He misses that spin kick and then turns it into a spinning back fist and knocks him out. In his fight against Aslan, low hands and throwing kicks from distance. He goes in for the takedowns, rolls with the punches. Aslan, punch to clinch. Aslan takes him down. Aslan has success when he's on top. So to me, Turkalj lost the first round. But then in the second round, it starts off, and the first minute and a half, Turkalj's losing the first minute and a half. And then he ends up getting the takedown, elbows, and then out of it, he ends up getting the rear naked choke. He stands back. Hold me back. The ref's got to hold him back. He's freaking out. So a big win for Turkalj. He took all that time off, and then he ended up on Dana White's Contender Series. He said in that pre-fight pre-pack, he turned down a lot of fight offers, and he really wanted to prove himself, whether it was in the UFC or Contender Series. Got the short notice opportunity, but he, to me, if he loses this fight to Vitor Petrino, it's kind of like that Uncle Lucius song, wolves are at his door, like.
I have no idea.
Turkalj's out there. You don't know that song?
No.
You've never heard that song?
You're acting like it's like Drake sang it.
It's a big song. It's a big song. Wolves are at his door. If Turkalj loses, and for Petrino, he's getting this big opportunity, but Petrino reminds me of a guy that just made a debut not long ago, where it was like, okay, in that one, he's facing a big-time, gatekeeper at this point. It was when Claudio Ribeiro went in and took on Abdulrazak Al-Hassan. It was like, Ribeiro's the hotness. Al-Hassan's been around for too long, and Al-Hassan just put on a veteran Savi performance and beat Ribeiro. To me, Petrino could be that guy. He's all the hotness, didn't take on a great level competition on the regional scene, got dropped on Contender Series only to come back and rally through and get the win. Will the takedown defense shine? Will we see that great balance that we've seen out of Petrino with his takedown defense on the regional scene? Or Turkalj be able to go in? Maybe he doesn't have the greatest striking defense, but he has those chops to get the takedown. And his stick-to-itiveness in his fights have really kind of shone through as well for Turkalj. We'll see how it plays out. Petrino opened a decent favorite. The line's kind of shrunk on him, getting close to par. Turkalj's gained a little bit. We have a look at the Tapology votes, Matt. Surprise to us as they are to you. I'm going to say over-under. Where it's getting close, I'm going to say over under 62.5% Petrino.
I'll say over.
I'm going to say over, and it is over. So 607 total votes, 77% Petrino, 85% by knockout, the 23% that have Turkalj, 44% by decision, and then there's about an even split between the knockouts and the submissions there for Turkalj, who, when he gets you down, he makes you pay, and he can rinse and repeat with the takedowns, and I love just that steadiness out of Turkalj in these fights.
I do. I just think he's going to eat a lot of damage on the way in for some of those takedown attempts. And that's why I do have Petrino. I'll be interested to see how they do build Petrino because, again, younger guy, only 7-0, not a ton of experience. So this will be the best win on his record and one that you can definitely build on in the future. But I definitely do have Petrino in this match because I do like the upside of his striking. He's a guy who can match the power with the hand speed. For those reasons, I have him in the fight.
I'll go with Petrino. I like the fact that he mixes in the power shots and he'll toss that jab out there to then get the right hand, switch stances a little bit. So for me, I'll go with Petrino. Again, the level of competition before the Antigulov fight, not very good. And there's definitely some question marks, especially with the chin when you see Blotto land that straight shot through the middle. But he fought through adversity with Turkalj. The wrestling is so good, and he is so well schooled out of All-Stars and GBG MMA, which he represents as well. So a big-time matchup in this light heavyweight division. Both of us going with Petrino to get the win. Some big fights left on this card. Petr Yan taking on Merab Dvalishvili in that main event. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Last weekend, Joe Rogan, DC, and the boys were excited about the bantamweight division, and coming up this weekend, this fight has rankings written all over it. Said Nurmagomedov looking to defend the number next to his name in his 4-fight win streak against a fellow finisher whose 4-fight win streak is also on the line in Dragon Jonathan Martinez. Martinez with the biggest statement win of his career. Dropped Cub Swanson with the hands in the first round, dropped him with the leg kick in the second round. TKO due to leg kick against Cub Swanson. And you have to think for Martinez, you know that sidewinder southpaw style is a big part of his game, but he's learning a little bit from Chris Gutierrez, the leg kick king at Factory X Muay Thai. And when you look at this for both of these guys and you consider all the fights, the wins, the losses, the level of competition, for Said Nurmagomedov, it is interesting because out of the last 2 fights, a little bit of adversity against D. Silva, Douglas Silva de Andrade, but he picks up the win there. He's ranked But then he fights down against an unranked guy in Sedriques Rachmanov, and you talk about adversity. He withstood it in that fight. And now again, he doesn't get a ranked guy in the matchup. And I went through bantamweight and I considered, okay, well, who's unranked and doesn't have a fight right now? Umar Nurmagomedov, you're not going to fight him. Kyler Phillips is up around the rankings, but he's injured, so you're not going to fight him. You got Dominic Cruz. When Said Nurmagomedov's name comes across the table, Dominic Cruz doesn't sign that contract.
He just acts like he's not home. That's what he does.
Yeah, I don't know about that guy. And Sean O'Malley, who's way up at the top. For Nurmagomedov, if you want to stay active, I guess you're going to fight a guy like Jonathan Martinez. But when you look at both of these guys, Matt, I mean, for Martinez, sometimes he can grapple offensively, but we don't see it very often.
This fight.
I think of that Liu Pingyuan fight as one where he was able to kind of initiate it a little bit. But when I look at both of these guys, Jonathan Martinez with the hands, oh my gosh, with the kicks, oh my gosh. When you look at Said Nurmagomedov and his grappling, and you look at the fights against Mark Striegel, the fight that he had against Cody Stamann, the fight that he had against his last time out, Sedriques Rachmanov, his defensive submissions, it's like 1985's Duran Duran, and I've got it as a single. A view to a kill. Oh my gosh, that guy's bringing out a view to a kill with that defensive grappling, and you saw it in those 3 submission wins, and that's 3 out of the last 4 fights for Nurmagomedov, where he's been able to turn the tables with those submissions. You love to see that. These are 2 of the highest level guys in this division, even though one of them is unranked. I absolutely love this fight. This might be my favorite fight on the card, Matt, as the hand up.
It's a great fight on this card, but the one thing about Jonathan Martinez, you know what he reminds me of? It's like going for a walk in the neighborhood and you see somebody's building a house and they only have the frame up of it. You can appreciate the frame and you think they're going to build a great house based off that frame, but there's some question marks left in your head, you know? The garage might be a little bit too small. You know, it's a big house. They probably have 2 cars.
A Hummer?
No, my whole point is for Martinez, he has the framework of a phenomenal fighter, but there are some of the in-betweens that he still struggles with that makes him not really a top 15 fighter all that yet. Now, I do wonder if people are going to be buying high off him based on the Cub Swanson win, because Cub Swanson at his best is still a very good fighter, and he didn't look good in that matchup. And I think about Cub Swanson. Remember the Renato Moicano fight? I think Renato Moicano is a better fighter than Jonathan Martinez is for his division. I will say that, but Renato Moicano hit him with a jab, took us back, and choked him out. Like, when Cub Swanson is off, boy, is he ever off. So, as much as I enjoy watching Jonathan Martinez fight, and if you guys have watched our videos for any period of time, you know that I'd pump this guy's tires up quite a bit, but like you had mentioned, he is a phenomenal kicker at range. For a guy who's only 135 pounds to 145 pounds, depending on if he makes weight or not, he is one of the pound-for-pound harder kickers you will see out there.
To all 3 levels, too. That's
exactly.
what you love.
And I like the body kick out of him, too, because it's a draining technique. You can tell it takes a lot out of his opponent when he does land those. But the thing is, Martinez at his best is a guy who's going to throw a lot of kicks. Well, a lot of kicks is just going to make Nurmagomedov have more opportunities to take you down. So if Martinez can implement the leg kick a lot, then yes, I think it'll be very effective in slowing down the game plan of Nurmagomedov. The problem is, that's only one of those 3 levels that you talk about. And if he's not able to then implement the body and the head kick off the leg kick, I do think he is going to struggle at range in this fight, because Martinez is a guy who has good hands offensively, but think about every Jonathan Martinez highlight you've ever had in your mind. Normally the hands are mixed in with the combination with his kicks. And I don't think he's going to have as much success just boxing at range with a guy like Nurmagomedov, because Nurmagomedov's going to be able to float the hands in quick and then rush it a lot with his takedown attempts. Now, if Martinez can threaten with the guillotine, threaten with some of those defensive submissions to at least make Said Nurmagomedov respect his grappling game, then maybe Nurmagomedov will face him a little bit more on the feet. I don't know what Martinez is going to be able to do in terms of consistent grappling on the mat to make this fight interesting.
Said Nurmagomedov's not an offensive wrestler. He has 9%
not.
takedown accuracy in the UFC over a decent enough sample size. I mean, you look at the wins, he's 6-1 in the UFC. You can see it on the graphic as well. But out of the takedowns, he gets 1 on Douglas Silva de Andrade. Silva de Andrade takes him down. He gets 1 against Justin Scoggins. I was going to say Jared Scoggins in his debut, wins that fight by split decision. In these fights, and as I mentioned, like, you look at the submissions he's getting, it's set up off of defensive mistakes and so on and so forth. Then that Sedriques Rachmanov fight, I missed that fight the night of, and there were DMs, there were people adding on Twitter, there were people all over our YouTube page. Like, I can't believe that Nurmagomedov won that fight, because up until he did, he lost every second. Like, he was outstruck by Rachmanov, taken down different times. And Rachmanov, like, the odds were close. He was a 2019 Combat Sambo bronze medalist, the silver medalist in that tournament. Dvalishvili, who's fighting in the main event. And the fact that he was released from his UFC contract is a travesty, and I will never let it go. But for Nurmagomedov, he withstood the adversity, he won the fight. It's just these guys are bringing the grappling to him, and then he goes guillotine, Dars, or his last time out, ninja choke, which I went and I watched a video and I want to give them credit because you have to. It was a video on Invisible Jiu-Jitsu about the technique of a ninja choke. Theirs was from closed guard, but his was like sitting on his butt, kind of parked out, and then he just pulled in. So it was a really crazy submission win for Nurmagomedov. But he's great with those defensive chokes. And Martinez, maybe he goes out there and grapples. I doubt he does. The other thing, I made a mistake. So I said with the hands in the first round against Cub Swanson, 18 seconds left in the first round. It's the knee that sends Swanson back. And then there's the ground and pound. The second round, it's a left hook to the elbows. And then he's able to land a knockdown. They might not credit him with a knockdown in that one, but
for sure.
Swanson flops down, and then out of it after, at near the end of the round, 43 seconds left, leg kick, TKO win. 8-3 in the UFC for Jonathan Martinez, 2 performance bonuses, 1 against Liu Pingyuan, 1 against Cub Swanson. He's had Fight of the Nights written over some of these fights. It's a weird fight to try and predict because for as good as the striking is from Jonathan Martinez, Nurmagomedov, he's one of those guys that's cross-trained at a lot of different gyms.
Clean.
He doesn't get hit clean in a lot of the matchups. He fought at Mark Henry's, Nick Cantone MMA. He's fought with Jackson Wink at the start of his career, a.k.a. for bits, Extreme Couture for this one, all over the place. Martinez used to be a Texas-based guy. That's where he's from. He's since switched it up to Factory X Muay Thai. He's really added to it. So I love the matchup, guys. It's a really hard one to offer you up a prediction because Nurmagomedov's been favored in a lot of these fights. We've seen him withstand a lot of adversity, and in this one, he's still favored to win the fight. Martinez is the underdog. I'm eager to see the Tapology votes on this one because I don't really know where they're going to be. I'm going to say over, under 70% Nurmagomedov in the fight with the number next to his name.
I'll say under.
I'm going to say under. It's over. 707 total votes, 83% Nurmagomedov, 54% by decision, 33% by submission for the 17% that I'm Martinez, 77% by decision. And we've seen Jonathan Martinez go out there and knock down plenty of guys. Frankie Saenz fights, one of them. We've seen him go out there and struggle with the takedown in certain fights. But again, Nurmagomedov is not known as an offensive grappler per se. So I'm eager to see what we get out of this one because I have a hard time, as I said, with a pick on the fight.
It's a hard pick to make just because, again, it speaks to the depth of the bantamweight division. You have guys like Jonathan Martinez and Syed Nurmagomedov who are barely ranked in the division. So, again, it just speaks to how great the whole overall division is. I have Nurmagomedov. I know you talk about his lack of offensive wrestling, and you are right, but I still think it will play a factor in this matchup. I think Jonathan Martinez does need combinations to really hurt his opponents, and like I had kind of mentioned, Nurmagomedov's a difficult guy to hurt clean. You can out-volume him, you can out-maneuver him and out-output him, but again, he's a hard guy to hit clean and drop, and that's what Jonathan Martinez really does rely on. It's his knockdown ability in a lot of these matchups. I love watching the Dragon Jonathan Martinez fight, but I do have Syed Nurmagomedov in this matchup, but this is a very closely contested fight.
To me, Syed Nurmagomedov looked really good, well-rounded in his fight against Douglas Silva de Andrade, who you can draw some parallels, southpaw, just like Jonathan Martinez.
He's old enough to be his dad, though.
He's tricky, he bleeds a lot, he knocked out Gaetano Pirello with one of the craziest shots I've ever seen. But for Nurmagomedov, he can get backed up a lot behind that black line, and he becomes really reactive. Now, he was born in the darkness. He's great with being reactive. And Nurmagomedov, early on in his career, 6-1, taking on Magomed Bibulatov. Like, he fought a really high-level competition outside of the UFC. But for Martinez, where I'm getting at is he fights at a much higher pace, picks his power shots, lands all 3 levels with the kicks. I don't think Martinez is going to be able to land that body kick, but the leg kick to slow down the movement of a guy like Nurmagomedov. I like the underdog, Jonathan Martinez, in the matchup. So I'm going with the Dragon in the fight. I never thought I'd say it, but off of watching the fight tape, it made me side more with Martinez. You've got Syed Nurmagomedov in the fight. Really eager to hear what the fans are thinking on this one. Do you have Nurmagomedov? Do you have J. Martinez? You have to call me Dragon in the fight. It's a big-time one in the bantamweight division that's loaded, and leading with that main event, you have Petr Yan taking on Merab Dvalishvili. I can't wait for the fight. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Brazil's Ricardo Ramos has alternated wins and losses since 2019, and if you're wondering, he won his last fight, so maybe this is the time for the loss, and he's going to look to make it 2 wins in a row when he takes on Texan finisher Lights Out Austin Lingo's been on the shelf for some time. We haven't seen Lingo since 2021. He made it close to the top of the mountain with the LFA. He's putting on great performances, and out of all the finishes that Lingo has, 5 of them in the first round. In the UFC, he lost a decision to Yusuf Salal a few years ago, and he picked up big wins over Jacob Kilburn and Luis Saldana. Knockdowns in both of those fights. It was the first round against Kilburn. It was the third round against Saldana, and I love to see those gritty fights like Lingo was in against Saldana, where he gets outstruck in the first round, he grits his teeth, he wins the second round, Saldana slows down in the third round, and what dropped Saldana in that third round? Switch levels, jab to the body, and Saldana's down. So a crazy performance from Lingo. I wish we got to see him in 2022. He had some injuries that he had to look after. He did an interview with, and I want to make sure that I get this one right, it was Low Kick MMA back in May of last year before his fight with David Onama. So he's supposed to fight in July. That the headline out of the interview was that was the last fight on his contract. So I would assume that this is the last fight on his contract, but I don't know for certain. So he said in the fight he was supposed to have against Jonathan Pierce that would have been February of last year, that he tore possibly his meniscus right before that fight, so he had it worked on by the doctor. He was going to be good to go for Onama, but of course that fight fell out. So now, the last time that we saw Austin Lingo was back in August of 2021, so a long layoff for him. And for Ricardo Ramos, this is a guy that's kind of bounced around between gyms, looked like he found a home at Team Alpha Male, had some representation from that gym when he took on Danny Chavez back last June. He had Alexander Munoz there, the wrestling coach. And for Danny Chavez, I don't think he watched any fight tape on Ricardo Ramos, because what did Ramos do? Threw a bunch of spinning wheel kicks that didn't land, and then threw the spinning back fist, and, well, it was the elbow that landed out of the spin. Like, that was gross.
That was wild.
And Chavez was just there for the taking. There was the follow-up. So a big win for Ramos, a long layoff. He was supposed to take on back in September of last year Danny Henry. Both guys forced out due to injury. Ramos, from his Instagram, looks like he's training back home in Brazil, so that's interesting to see. And if you go down through the record for Ramos, he's been a big favorite in certain fights. He's lost as the underdog. But you go back to the spins, and again, you saw it on the regional scene. You saw it in the debut at UFC 217. Two spinning back elbows that he landed against Ayman Zahabi, and he ends up getting the finish there in a performance bonus. Ramos' highs have been higher in the UFC because he's 3-2 in the UFC compared to the 2-1 out of Austin Lingo. But the craziest part about this fight, you might really like Ramos, you might be really down on Austin Lingo. Lingo's gritty. Lingo fights behind boxing combinations. He's got good defensive wrestling. He can kind of get caught in a mirror sometimes in these fights.
And that's what I keep on running into. Ramos throws a large variety of strikes, so I do worry that Lingo is going to be caught on the back foot just watching what Ramos is throwing, because there's a lot that you have to think about when you're fighting a guy like Ramos. You make fun of a guy like Danny Chavez because, listen, he didn't watch any tape. That's what you have to watch out for with Ramos, but it's difficult to be able to figure out where he's spinning from when he's throwing straight shots, because for as good as the unorthodox strikes are, he does have good technique when he does resort to his traditional kickboxing, has good kicks, is an upright striker, has decent boxing too from the outside. The thing about Ramos is, if you do get uncomfortable with his striking and decide, hey, I'm a wrestler now, he can threaten with a lot of those defensive submissions, a la the guillotine
also get held down like he did against Tucker.
Exactly, that's the problem with Ramos. He is one of these grapplers who, hey, his initial line of defense is quite strong, but if you get over that initial hurdle and hold him on his back, you can have quite a bit of success. So I will be curious to see if Lingo does go for takedowns in this matchup, because Ramos, I think, will have more success on the feet. I like his variety of strikes. I like his volume too on the feet. I do worry about him eating a big shot here or there, but the thing about Ramos is he has decent footwork when he's not being threatened by the takedown, and that's why, again, I'm curious to see when and if Lingo does go for a takedown, because Ramos, if you're just a pure striker, does do a good job at moving and getting his back off the cage, but if you're able to throw strikes and then mix in your wrestling with some of those strikes, you can confuse him, which is kind of what I mentioned Ramos might be able to do against Lingo, and with that confusion, you might be able to complete some of those takedowns, and like you had mentioned, that is a big weakness for Ramos. He's not a bad grappler, I don't think, but he can get held down on his back for long periods of time and definitely give up rounds if he is faced with that type of situation. So for Ramos, that's the one situation he has to avoid like it is the plague.
And
you can't get taken down by a guy like Lingo, because I do favor Ramos' movement on the feet, and I really do think that footwork's going to be a key for him.
I'd say Ramos has beaten better guys. Probably the best guy in his record in the UFC. It's either Kyung Ho Gong or Bill Algeo. But you look at the wins, Ayman Zahabi, Gong, Journey Newson, Eduardo Garagori, that was a performance bonus, Algeo, and then Danny Chavez. But likewise for Austin Lingo, His best win to me might be Solo Hatley, which was with the LFA. Like, I don't know, Jacob Kilburn's UFC run wasn't the greatest. And then if you look at it the last time out, Luis Saldana, he does have a UFC win. The first round highs are high. The submissions are good. The striking's good. The 3-round game hasn't necessarily been there for that fight-ready MMA prospect. So to me, Lingo doesn't necessarily have a lot of wasted movement like you see it of Ramos, because Ramos, yes, the spins are great. Yes, the spins are awesome. But if you miss 5 spinning wheel kicks in the first round, and again, Tim Duncan referenced the big fundamental out of Austin Lingo, a lot of jabs mixed with that right cross.
Tim Duncan,
if it just
Austin Lingo
burns on you, Austin Lingo can go out there and do those types of things too, guys, even though he might be known as a first-round finisher, though the 2 wins in the UFC are by decision. So you look at the odds in the matchup. Ricardo Ramos is a really big favorite, which surprised me when I wrote them down on the page. We have a look at the topology votes, Matt. It wouldn't necessarily be a surprise to me if the fans go with him overwhelmingly. I'm going to say over-under 92.5% Ramos.
You caught me off guard with how high of a percentage that was. I'll say under, but it'll be the favorite.
It's slightly under. There you go. 652 total votes, 86% Ramos, 65% by decision. For those that have Lingo, the 14%, 63% by decision. So the fans, between 2 finishers, think it's going to go to a decision. I like that. That's interesting.
I wouldn't be surprised if we went to a decision either. Again, both guys do have decent lasting power. I don't think it's a case where, hey, when the 3rd round comes around, one will have a huge advantage over the other with their output or with their cardio. But I do favor Ramos. You bring it up. You're a little surprised with the odds. I would still favor Ramos about a 175 to maybe a minus 200 in that category, but that's still closer than where the odds currently are. So maybe you do see value in Austin Lingo, but personally, I like Ramos in the pick. I like his variety of strikes. You bring it up. Is there some wasted movement there? Yeah, without a doubt, but I still like what he brings to the table in terms of the kicks at long range, especially in terms of the boxing combinations too. So I do worry about Lingo's power, especially with some of the counters, but I still have Ramos in the matchup.
Lingo against traditional strikers has great moves because he can plod forward, he can throw that jab, he can single or double, and then when you go to try and counter him, he goes up over that and ends up landing that right cross. There's tons of power. That's how he was able to knock down Jacob Kilburn in the first round of their fight. It's just, to me, you're doing that at the center of the octagon. Ramos can kind of move out of the way, or he can land those spin attacks. So to me, I will go with the varied attack of Ricardo Ramos, but it scares me with the way that those odds are formulated right now. So maybe you do like lights out Austin Lingo. I love to go back and watch these 2 guys fight. It's some of the most fun tape study you're going to go out there and do, whether you do it or not. You let us know down below in the comments section. Let us know who you have in the pick as well. Some big fights left on this card, including Alexander Volkov taking on Alexander Romanov, and the main event from a few weeks ago that's now on this card, Nikita Krylov taking on Ryan Spann. Be sure to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Nikita Krylov got sick the day of the fight. The main event was off, and everybody had to get excited for Andrea Muniz versus Brendan Allen. And out of that, one of us ended up on a poster on Brendan Allen's Instagram page. Matt, coming up this weekend, a 3-rounder, not a 5-rounder. Nikita Krylov taking on Ryan Spann. And for Ryan Spann, that's got to be welcome, because his only main event in the UFC was against Anthony Smith, and he didn't fare all that well. Now, all things considered, we broke this fight down in incredible detail 2 weeks ago. We're going to throw it on back to that preview. Going to offer you up a final pick and prediction on this fight. For Ryan Spann, you look at the run that he's had throughout his overall career, and there's definitely been a lot of adversity. We can say that about both fighters, but Spann, unsuccessful for the LFA light heavyweight championship. His first run through, he took on Leo Leite. That was for the middleweight champ over there with Legacy way back when. Then he was able to win the championship with LFA for that light heavyweight belt. He fights on Dana White Contender Series against Carl Robertson, doesn't get the win, builds himself back up. You know the story by now, but the last little run that he's had, it's been absolute burners. I mean, his fight against Johnny Walker was wild. His fight against Misha Serkinov netted him a performance bonus. He loses to Anthony Smith in his first main event opportunity with the UFC, and then it's a win over Iwan Kutselaba, and his last time out, it's that power jab, and then that right hand that just sent Dominic Reyes like a tumbling sack of bricks. His last time out, on a pay-per-view card no less. So, a giant win for Ryan Spann his last time out. And for Nikita Krylov, the highs have been high. You look at his first fight in the UFC at heavyweight as a young, fresh-faced kid, he gets finished. And then he goes out there and knocks out Walt Harris. So, some crazy things for Nikita Krylov. But all the way now, his last 2 fights, He finishes Alexander Gustafsson. Whoever would have thought that that would be a sentence that we'd utter. Just even think about it. And then Krylov's last time out, exactly, in the first round against Volkan Oezdemir. I mean, he got banged like Lisa Ann in the 90s. And then he withstood that. And even one of the judges, 30-27 out there, good second round, good third round. Nikita Krylov was able to withstand that punishment and just keep on ticking and really show why he's become a durable, well-rounded fighter in some of these matchups.
A durable, well-rounded fighter in some of... It's like Sex Panther. It works 60% of the time, every single time. Nikita Krylov is a lot like the Death Star in Star Wars. It's really pretty and fancy when you look at it from the outside, but it tends to have that one weakness that if you can exploit, it all goes to hell. And that's the thing for Nikita Krylov.
Never been knocked down in light heavyweight, but he's been put on skates.
Nikita Krylov defensively does have some liabilities, not only with his striking, but even defensively with some of his grappling. He's one of these fighters who from top position, when he's able to land his own ground and pound, he has very good elbows in the top position. He does a great job of kind of, softening up his opponent to go for his own submissions, but when he does fight other guys who do have more of a wrestling advantage over him, even go back and watch the Jan Blachowicz fight. And I know Jan is a very good fighter, but grappling isn't necessarily the first thing you think of when you think about Jan Blachowicz, and he was able to get Krylov's back, apply the rear naked choke. He looked really good with his own grappling in that matchup, and that's why I've always had a really hard time predicting a Nikita Krylov fight, because the highs are so high, but the lows can be very low too, and he does have a very wonky style of fighting. It's on the outside, he keeps his hands kind of low, he'll throw a lot of kicks. He has a heavy-handed fighter, but that's the one thing I will say. He does not want to get into a boxing match with a guy like Ryan Spann, because the one thing that I do worry about for Spann in this matchup is, and you had kind of mentioned it, his last two losses are to Johnny Walker and Anthony Smith. Two long-range, kick-heavy light heavyweights who can stand far away from you and force you to walk into a lot of their shots. Now, Krylov will stand a little bit more upright. He's not as lean back as those two previous opponents are, but he can use a lot of those similar game plans that we have seen. If he uses the low kick effectively, that's something Ryan Spann does struggle with. He doesn't necessarily have a great answer for it right away, but again, I just worry about Nikita Krylov getting too comfortable on the feet. If he's not able to get his kicks involved in this matchup, I could see him having a lot of difficult times, especially with Spann early on in the fight, because I don't care what you thought about Dominic Reyes, and I didn't know what Dominic Reyes had left in him. I didn't think Ryan Spann had that type of performance in his back pocket.
Yeah, Ryan Spann fights like he's got a car parked outside, and he hasn't fed the meter, so he's got to get really quick and get moving. And for Spann, he's not paid by the hour. And if you look at it for Nikita Krylov, he can play the long game, and that's not always the fun thing, but some fights, they're barn burners. But some fights, like his fight against Johnny Walker, he fought to his game plan, he took him down, he was just a wet blanket over him, so MMA math says, well, Johnny Walker beat Ryan Spann by knockout, and Nikita Krylov beat Johnny Walker by decision. Krylov wins, but it's not that way, because for Spann, he's been susceptible to that finish twice. Once against Karl Robertson, arms locked up against the cage, elbows land, Spann's finished. Same thing happened against Johnny Walker. For Spann, what does he do so well? He's so tall and he's so big. I don't know how he made middleweight before, because he's a giant light heavyweight. He stands kind of like this, and he lands that really good jab, but he'll double up on the jab to disguise his right hand, and he pumps it out there really quick, and there's a ton of power on both the shots. Again, it's not often that you see somebody with power jab knockout wins, but that's what they credit Spann with in his last fight against Dominic Reyes, where Reyes was walking in, Spann stepped forward with it, and then the right hand came in and knocked him down. But if you look at the Spann wins, again, and even some of the losses, the fight against Ion Cutelaba goes out there, gets a takedown, ends up in mount, and then all of a sudden Spann's bucking him off. Spann puts both legs in it like a bunny rabbit, kicks him completely off up against the cage, and then Spann's back up again. Cutelaba gets a little bit wild and reckless. He's going to fight Tanner Boser next, which is a little bit wild. Spann, like Aaron Blanchfield, standing guillotine, pulls it up, and then spins and lands on top, and he gets the guillotine finish. For Spann, the only trouble is, you mentioned it, the fight that he had against Anthony Smith, how did that fight go? They strike for a little bit, Spann then gets the back of Smith, picks him up and walks him across the cage. Smith is like, what's going on? Spann gets down, he has a lot of success, and then all of a sudden, out of all of the scrambles, Smith is getting on top, because he did put him on skates. He gets him into a rear naked choke position. Smith ends up getting the win. They draw after the fight, so on and so forth. Spann is such an interesting fighter because he's a decent grappler. He's a really good striker. It's just bringing it all together in the cage. And for Nikita Krylov, his defensive grappling can kind of get caught because he becomes like Happy Feet with his own grappling.
That's so weird.
And he takes big expenditures in some of these fights. So again, you already brought up some of the fights, but he had back-to-back losses, one to Magomed Ankalaev. That's Nikita Krylov's only UFC fight in Vegas to this point, is one loss to Magomed Ankalaev. And then he fought Paul Craig, where he was just landing those big shots. Paul Craig was 6 ways to Sunday, and then all of a sudden, like The Undertaker, he came back. If you look at it for Ryan Spann in Vegas, he's 3-3, so at least he has a few wins to his ledger that way. So, big-time matchup. Obviously, again, master of sport and a black belt in Kyokushin Karate for Nikita Krylov, and you see that a little bit out of his style. But I think even in the thumbnail, I hope I kind of hit it, because Krylov in the in-between sometimes, boy, does he ever get hit in some of these fights.
And I don't know if you know this, but Ryan Spann hits so effing hard in those in-betweens that it is a really dangerous fight for Krylov. But again, Krylov has the more methods to win this fight. He does have the improved grappling, but that's the weird thing about Krylov and his grappling. I have no idea what my opinion is of Nikita Krylov on the mat. I've seen him get submitted by Paul Craig, which isn't the end of the world. A lot of good fighters have been submitted by Paul Craig. But sometimes in long grappling sequences, he can look dominant. And other times, he does seem to be a bit of a step behind. So for those reasons, I don't think Spann's going to have success in the grappling in this matchup. I will say that. If Spann goes for a takedown, I think it'll be one of those where Nikita Krylov's butt hits the ground and they get right back up. We might see a little bit more clinch control from that. I think it's a very dangerous fight for Krylov to fight if he's the one on the back foot trying to measure Ryan Spann for a power shot, because Spann moving forward is a terrifying force to deal with. But I do find myself favoring Krylov just because he does have the more methods in this fight.
I mean, in these main event videos, like, just going right off, like, there's a style.
Well, I just, we've set it up 6 ways to Sunday, as you have said, and for Krylov, it's just interesting, because both these guys have fought a lot of fighters in the top 15, and it does get to be a point where we've seen with Derek Lewis, for instance, you've beat a lot of guys in the top 15, you've lost to a lot of guys in the top 15, at a certain point, until you do look really dominant and have really impressive finishes over these guys, people aren't going to care as much. So I just think Krylov has a very important fight for him ahead of him, because he has the fighting style that could get him, maybe not a title, just because 205 is so wide open right now, but could get him one of those really exciting matchups, maybe another fight against an Ankalaev. It's just, he needs to go out there and look really good against Spann.
I think the winner of this fight gets the returning Alexander Rakic. And if you look at it at Fight Night Picks over in the YouTube community tab, we threw it out there to you folks. You have number 6 Krylov taking on number 8 Ryan Spann. 51% with Krylov, 49% with Ryan Spann. The comments, Classical Andrew, thought the Oezdemir fight was an impressive performance for Krylov. For some reason, I don't find myself putting too much stock in those last 2 Spann wins. I got Krylov by sub. The one and only Krylov is going to expose Spann for being a glass cannon. That's rude. Spann is dangerous early, but I don't trust him the longer the fight goes on. And let's see, Mark, I wonder if Spann bothered training. Seemed to work in his favor last time. I mean, he did look really good his last time out. So Nikita Krylov making the walk against Ryan Spann coming up this weekend. And if you do consider Krylov's still the favorite, Spann's still the underdog, we have a look at the Tapology votes. We mentioned our YouTube community tab votes when we talked about this fight earlier. So we'll just have a glance at them.
Oh my goodness!
Well, that doesn't make sense. 617 total votes. It's 50% Spann, 50% Krylov, 73% of the Spann voters, my goodness, have him to win by knockout.
Spann voters.
The 47% that have Krylov have him to win by knockout. So Matt, the Spann contingent have grown because Nikita Krylov may or may not have had food poisoning the day of the fight. So ultimately, the fans have shifted. Have you shifted on this fight?
You like the 1975 way more than I do, but I've hung out with girls in their mid-20s, so I've had a change of heart, Craig.
Oh boy.
I'm going with Ryan Spann in the matchup now. I did like Nikita Krylov initially when we broke it down, and like Craig has said, he's going to put the initial video in there so you can hear what we initially said about this fight, but I thought it was a really close fight when we broke it down, and we had both said on question mark kicks when we had our final breakdown of the fight that, hey, it's close, and I thought about switching my pick on question mark kicks, and I do think that the subtraction of 2 additional rounds in this fight is enough for me to pick Ryan Spann in the matchup. I worry about the defensive grappling of him, I definitely do, but I do think his power is going to be carried in a larger percentage of the fight, because here's the thing, if he can just win 2 rounds in this matchup, he can win the fight. If he won 2 rounds in the last matchup, you still need to worry about him not getting finished for an additional 15 minutes, so I still think it's a very close fight. I don't really think there's an incorrect pick in in this one, but I do ever so slightly side with Ryan Spann now.
I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to go with Nikita Krylov. I think he just has that grappling advantage in this fight, but we've seen Ryan Spann turn that table on a lot of different fighters, chief among those wins that Ion Cutelaba fight not that long ago. So a big-time matchup in the light heavyweight division, a lot riding on this one. We're split on the pick. Let us know down below in the comment section who you have. And next up on the docket, Alexander Volkov taking on Alexander Romanov. So a couple of Alexanders who spell it differently going at it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Alexander Volkov, the nickname is Drago. He comes into this weekend's co-main event having just headlined a card last June against Jairzinho Rozenstruik, knocked him out in the first round and took some time away. He's been in 7 UFC main events, 4-3 in those, and 1-0 in his co-main event slot against Greg Hardy. Volkov looking to turn away another hype prospect in King Kong Alexander Romanov, representing Konrad Moldova. And for Moldova, 2 top fighters in the heavyweight division in Sergey Spivak and Romanov. But the weirdest part about this fight, Matt, is for Volkov, former M1 Global Heavyweight Champ. He got to the top of the mountain or close to it over with Bellator. He's had these big opportunities in the UFC, but hasn't really kind of been able to cash out on those chances. But when you look at it for Volkov, a main event slot last June, gets first round knockout. Romanov, 16-0 going into a fight against Marcin Tybura. King Kong's in the first round. And then he's got nothing left in round 2 and round 3. Loses a majority decision. The only loss on Romanov's record. Now all of a sudden, he fights up in the rankings against Volkov. And newsflash, Romanov's the favorite in the fight. So it's really weird to see these circumstances getting Romanov into this fight. And for Volkov, appendicitis on his Instagram back in December, so hopefully the tummy ache that's the worst.
We all know that one kid in middle school who missed a week because they got appendicitis.
I haven't had it yet. That's why I call it a tummy ache. It's a joke. It's definitely bad, and it's probably really scary. So good for Volkov to get that addressed. And for Volkov, training for this fight, not at a Strela team or Extreme Couture or American Top Team, at a Black House MMA in California. So interesting to see that out of Volkov. For Romanov, not out of Extreme Couture, where he's been in the past. He's training back home at Lion Club Comrade, back in Moldova, getting back to his roots, just like that Florida Georgia Line song. Got to dig your roots.
Can I be
before the
honest?
sun goes down.
I think this fight's going to be awful to watch.
You do?
I do, and this is why. Volkov at this stage of his career, and it really set in during the Greg Hardy fight, he's not a guy who's all that aggressive anymore.
He did in his last fight!
Because Jairzinho came at him, and then he countered him, hurt him, and dropped him.
Romanov's going to come at him.
He will, but he's not going to do it in the same manner. Romanov's going to come at you with threatening with his grappling and not the striking. When you're fighting Jairzinho, you have to worry about one thing, and it's a flurry the last 15 seconds of every single round. And other than that, it's a climbable mountain. It looks pretty big, but you'll get to the top of it. I just worry about Volkov and his overall aggressiveness at this stage of his career, because go back and watch the Greg Hardy fight. That's one of the worst fights of all time, and it's a fight that Volkov should have won in the first 30 seconds, if we're being honest. Now, I get it. You can't be all that aggressive against a guy like Hardy, because if he does knock you out in the first round, that is a huge hit to your career, but Volkov just went out there, threw the jab a couple times, waited for Greg Hardy to move forward, and wasn't all that aggressive with his own game plan in the matchup. And I do think there's a world where, oddly enough, Romanov, he's a guy who's known, of course, for his wrestling. He moves really well on the outside when he wants to, though. And that's where Romanov is going to have a big trouble with fighting the guys at the top level. He does a good job at moving on the outside. He doesn't do a good job planting his feet and then striking on the outside, but he does a good job at moving on the inside. His game is very much broken up into different segments, and it's going to be a matter of blending them all together. We saw that, of course, in the Marcin Tybura fight. But even if you want to bring up the Tybura fight, did Volkov look that good when he beat him? Not really.
Romanov, in this fight, and in the last 2 years, 4 fights the sample size. Okay, so let's look at the wins, the convincing wins. He beats Jared Vandera, the Mountain. He beats Chase Sherman, the Gift King, from 2017.
2 lower level heavyweights.
Win and a loss. The loss to Marcin Tybura, 10-8 first round. Then he loses the second round, loses the third round. Now,
do you think Volkov can do a good enough job defensively to get out of that round if he is on the verge of a 10-8 loss?
But that's the trouble. You look at that technical decision win that he has against Juan Espino. He wins the first round handily, and then second round gets harder, third round gets harder. There's the illegal strike, and then they go to a judge's scorecard. It's weird. Romanov can do everything in the first round. He can do most things in the second round. The third round, it's questionable. But for Romanov, what we saw in the regional scene was stance switches, long from southpaw. When he's out on the distance He's able to land
He's
whatever
shifty
strikes he
for a
wants
thick guy.
to land. So training back home, Lion Club comrade, really looking forward to it from Romanov. But the struggle is if he can't get past the first round, or if it does go past the first round, he can tend to struggle. And for Volkov, you look at it, UFC is what it is, 9-4 there, former M1 Global champ, had some really good fights over with Bellator. 71% takedown defense, and that takes into account 14 takedowns from Curtis Blades and 2 from Tom Aspinall in the first round that landed him into a submission win. So you might hold that fight with a lot of water. So positive strike differential, he strikes more than the average bear. When it does come to those strikes, 4.88 to 3.04 absorbed. For Volkov, keeping it on the feet, putting on the Ritz like that old taco song, and going out there and putting on a veteran-savvy performance against Romanov. But to me, again, it's a weird bit of matchmaking for me looking at
It is a weird bit of matchmaking, but the problem is, I want to favor with the underdog in this, but I keep on running into the fact that Romanov was able to take down a guy like Marcin Tybura, who's a great takedown artist in his own right, and a great grappler. And it's not that Volkov can't defend takedowns, because like you had brought up, he does do a good job at defending a high volume of takedowns, but once he does get taken down and once he's flat on his back, his size is a bit of a disadvantage at that point. He has very long legs. It's kind of difficult for him to regain his base and get back up to his feet. And that's why I posed the question, can he survive that first round if he has been taken down and is on the verge of a 10-8? Because let's say Romanov is able to go out there and get a takedown in the first 50, 45 seconds of the round. Romanov has that big of an advantage out the get-go that I do think he can finish a guy like Volkov.
And I made the mistake, and I'm going to talk about cartilage and Leatherby in the next fight. To be clear, for the Romanov fight against Marcin Tybura, 10-8 was scored in the first round by Derek Cleary, and then he scored the other 2 rounds for Tybura. For Sal D'Amato and for Michael Bell, the first round was not enough for Romanov, who in that first round went 64-1 in total strikes and 4 minutes and 27 seconds of control time. If that's not a 10-8, I don't know what is. Alexander Romanov is favored to win the fight, open the underdog, plus 130, minus 140. Volkov open, minus 150,
I'm
plus
curious
120.
about these Tapology votes.
We have a look at the Tapology picks. Matt, over, under, I'm going to say 65% Romanov.
I think it'll be under. I think Volkov would be the favorite.
And he is. So 755 total votes, 66% Volkov, 43% by decision, 51% by knockout for the 34% that have Romanov, 43% by submission, 19% by TKO. Matt, this is going to be a weird deep dive. Do you think your buddy Tim Rose is going to be happy at the end of the night? Does he think Volkov's going to win?
He does. He's been pretty confident about Volkov in this matchup because of his ability to defend the takedown. My problem is, how much offense is Alexander Volkov going to be able to get off in this fight? Like, I think he could do a 9.5 out of 10 job defensively with the takedowns and with the striking. But the thing is, how confident is he going to be with some of his long-range strikes? Because Volkov has great technique. He has pretty good power. I don't think anybody's ever going to accuse him of breaking the speed limit with his strikes by any means. Like, he does have a bit of a long recoil. There is a bit of a reset to his strikes. And that's why I think this fight might be a bit of a stale one. Because if Romanov is able to win that first round, similar to the last time, let's say he can get the 10-8, Volkov might win round 2 and 3, but it's going to be by an edge of like 4 significant strikes in round 2 and maybe 6 in round 3. Like, I just think this fight's going to be close no matter how you cut it. I will pick the underdog though, because again, Volkov I've seen in 5-round atmospheres, and I know that he does have the lasting power against guys like Curtis Blades, because for the longest time I used to make you roll your eyes because I used to say, hey, Volkov might have got beat that whole entire fight, but he looked pretty good in the 5th round. He was landing damaging strikes. He really made a good account of himself after being so exhausted in the match. So I don't have a ton of confidence in the pick, but I like the underdog Volkov with his amount of experience.
And for me, with a guy like Alexander Romanov and the game plan that was out there from Mr. Tom Aspinall, can't wait to see him get back. I'll go with King Kong Alexander Romanov in the fight. I think that threat of the takedown in the first round, Volkov training in the States, I'm sure at Black House MMA, there's going to be plenty of wrestlers there. That was one of those prime gyms way back when. But when you look at it for Romanov, getting back to his roots, going out there, getting the finish, I'm going to go with Romanov. So we're split on the pick of the Alexanders. Matt going with Drago, me going with King Kong. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have in this fight. I'm really eager to see where these two guys weigh in at, because Volkov shredded a little bit of the pounds, gained a back piece. We'll see how it plays out for both these guys. A big giant fight in the bantamweight division in that main event. Holy smokes, Jan versus Dvalishvili. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. absolute banger. Coming up this weekend in the main event, we have No Mercy Petr Yan, the former undisputed UFC bantamweight champion. He scuttled a little bit in his last 4 fights, 1-3 in those, taking on a man representing Georgia. The nickname's The Machine. He's not Bert Kreischer, it's Merab Dvalishvili. 8-fight win streak after dropping his first 2 in the UFC. And Merab Dvalishvili has the distinction of being one of the few Dana White's looking for a fighters who's had success in the UFC. So for Dvalishvili, it's been wild. He sent Jose Aldo to boxing in his last fight. How crazy.
A single tear
is
coming
that?
down my eye.
The UFC Hall of Famer, Jose Aldo, outstruck by Merab Dvalishvili. No takedowns earned from Merab in that fight. He went 0 of 16
I was
on
gonna say, the
takedown
threat
attempts
was there.
in that fight. So great to see from Merab. He continues to win. His corners last time out, Ray Longo, Harry Connick likes the freaking lasagna, Aljamain Sterling, the current champ, mind games with Petr Yan this time, and a man who every single time goes, "Come on, Merab!" Matt Serra in that corner. So for Merab Dvalishvili, a great opportunity. These two guys, ranked number 2 is Yan, ranked number 3 is Merab. They have a giant opportunity in this fight because the division's logjam. We talked about it earlier on. Sean O'Malley's the only top 5 ranked guy that doesn't have a fight. And if you look at it in the landscape, Aljamain Sterling, UFC 288, defends against the King of Cringe, Triple C, Henry Cejudo. So it really does logjam things and hold everything up. At least we get this great fight. It's a poster fight. It's a top 5 fight. It's a great, great fight. And I couldn't be more excited for Yan versus Dvalishvili.
This is an incredible matchup, and it's funny that you bring up Jose Aldo a few times because Petr Yan's takedown defense to me reminds me of one fighter in the world, and it is Jose Aldo. And I know Jose Aldo's kind of reached that mythical standpoint of, hey, his takedown defense is pretty much second to nobody's, but Yan really does have those active hips that reminds you, of a guy like Aldo, because Yan's someone who will go for the sprawl, use his hands, sneak the underhooks, can kind of use everything at once and doesn't just have to focus on one area of his takedown defense game. And I think that'll be interesting to see because, like you had brought up, Dvalishvili went for a ton of takedowns against Jose Aldo. He went 0 for 16, but he wasn't able to accomplish any of those. Now, a lot of what Merab is able to do successfully with his MMA game plan is based off of the threat of the takedown because his striking has gotten better. There's no doubt about that, but he is still incredibly wild with his striking. There is in no world, if Petr Yan and Merab put on just strictly boxing gloves and had to box, the fight would be over in 45 seconds and Petr Yan would be the one with his hand raised, because with pure boxing and pure striking technique, Petr Yan is definitely the more talented out of these two guys, but it comes down to how many opportunities is Petr Yan going to have at range, because Merab Dvalishvili is nothing if not dedicated to a game plan, and even if he is 0 for 11, 0 for 12, 0 for 13, he's willing to go 0 for 45. It's like that Kobe Bryant tweet, like, I'd rather you go 1 for 40 than 1 for 16, because if you go 1 for 16, it means that you gave up at one point. Merab isn't going to give up with his game plan. I do think it'll be interesting because for a guy who has such great 15-minute cardio, I will be curious to see how that holds up with 10 extra minutes, because Petr Yan will go through some points of his fights where he might not be the most active guy. He might be waiting a little bit defensively, but can he last 25 minutes? Of course he can, and he does carry power late into his fights. Remember how he dropped Corey Sandhagen in the 5th round of that matchup with that crazy left hook into his spinning back fist? I just think this fight's going to be very interesting because for as exciting of a prospect as Dvalishvili has been, he has faced some interesting roadblocks. Again, he got put on almost a poster against Marlon Moraes there. So for Merab, the weaknesses are there, but we just all know how good those strengths are at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, it was a left hand that wobbled Merab, and then he kind of dropped, and then you also had another left hook that dropped him, and Moraes ends up on top, but by the end of the first round, it's Merab who's on top.
That was so crazy.
Is Marlon out? It's one of the craziest rounds you're ever going to see. And then at the start of the second round, Merab, like a shark with blood in the water, just goes right after it. And he's able to get it done. Ground and pound finish. So if you do consider it and you look at both of these guys, for Merab, the level competition, it starts with Terrion Ware on the win streak. We got guys like Gustavo Lopez, John Dodson, Cody Stamann, Marlon Moraes, and then of course, Jose Aldo. But here's a crazy stat. Marlon was a great fighter. He was up at the top. Jose Aldo, obviously had his time. That was a retirement fight. But for Merab, 10th all-time in UFC history with 63 takedowns. Number 1 all-time in bantamweight history with 50. Well, where's the 13 takedowns? He fought Gustavo Lopez at a catch weight of 140 and landed 13 takedowns in that fight against Gustavo Lopez, who can wrestle a little bit in his own right. So if you look at it for this fight, You can't just say, oh, Merab, he's a black belt in judo. He's a 2019 Combat Sambo silver medalist. That's all he is. The hands have gotten better. He walks in, he'll paw his left hand out. He'll try and land the overhand right quite a bit. He throws a lot of spinning back fists. It's to either a giant positive, like his win over Raufeon Stotts that got him the contract, or he just sits there and spins and spins and spins like a Tasmanian devil. When you look at it for Petr Yan, you said it. I mean, he's no stranger to a 5-round fight. The ECB champ before he came into the UFC. His lone loss there to Nurmagomedov, where the takedowns, the striking, kind of bit him a little bit. But in their rematch, he came out guns a-blazing. But then in the UFC, lose to Aljamain Sterling, it's a feeling out process at the start where he loses traction in terms of scoring with the rounds.
He beat the brakes off him until he got disqualified in the first.
That's where I'm going. He ends up getting disqualified. He then goes out, beats Corey Sandhagen for the interim belt in the rematch against Aljamain Sterling, who had his back taken for most of that fight. It was Petr Yan. And then against the guy, and I know a lot of people, controversial as it is.
I thought Yan won it, but it was close.
Against Sean O'Malley, MMA decisions. 7 scored at 30-27 for Yan. 18 scored at 29-28 Yan. 1 scored at 29-28 for Sean O'Malley. Cartilage and Leatherby scored it for O'Malley over Petr Yan.
You had it for O'Malley on the Fight Companion.
I did. That was the first non-title fight for Petr Yan since he fought Uriah Faber back in 2019. So first non-title fight, first non-5-round fight, and maybe Yan had to get back into a 3-round atmosphere to get ready for that one. It really is tough. A lot of question marks around that fight.
I do think a 5-round atmosphere favors Yan.
Daniel Cormier went on DC and RC and kind of speculated to the fact that maybe Petr Yan was going to retire.
Well,
but
he said that.
Yan's management company was really quick to come out after that and say, no, he's not going to retire. So Yan for this one back at Tiger Muay Thai, Merab back at Longo Weidman MMA, but Merab Dvalishvili, like he's getting choked out by ladies in bikinis that are having a good time.
They got the defense, though.
Ray Longo's talking about it. Yeah, you grab it. Grab that piece.
And that Georgian hammer.
He's also the type of guy in winter to jump into a frozen lake and then eat a bunch of sticks on the way in. So, Merab.
I'd love to have a beer with Merab Dvalishvili. It would be one of the more interesting 45 minutes I think you could spend with a human.
You think a Merab beer lasts 45 minutes?
No, it probably lasts 45 seconds for him. I just hope that the time we spend together lasts close to an hour. Merab would be an interesting character because the vibes seem great, but I brought it up a few times already. A lot of what Merab does is the threat of the wrestling, which then opens up his striking. And what Petr Yan is great at is making you pay for your inaccuracies with your striking. Aljamain Sterling in their first fight throws a lot of volume, but the problem with throwing a lot of volume when it's not picture perfect is you do leave some openings with your strikes, and Petr Yan is doing a great job at really making him pay for the openings. And I think Merab is going to leave a lot of those similar openings in this fight. Can Merab win rounds by defending his head, going for takedowns, and really making it a gritty fight against Petr Yan? I think he can, but the problem is Yan does a great job with his counter strikes, and he makes his strikes really count when he throws his power ones. Like, you bring up the Uriah Faber fight, you bring up the Jimmy Rivera fight. When he decides to really plant and throw his strikes, there are devastating consequences. So hopefully Merab can show a more evolved game plan to where he's not just spamming some of those big power techniques. Maybe he will have more of a developmental game to putting his jab together with the power shots with his wrestling, because if he ever puts it all together, I'm telling you right now, it is a dangerous proposition for everybody else in the division. But he does lack the one thing you brought up, which is the back control and some of the more controlling techniques on the mat. I do think he's a little bit loose on top.
O'Malley was able to do in that fight a little bit.
O'Malley was, but the thing about O'Malley is he has such great technique at range that it was difficult for Petr Yan to get on the inside, and I still thought Petr Yan did a good enough job at winning that fight. So again, I think Merab is going to make a great account of himself. He is a very excited contender. There is no quit in Merab Dvalishvili, but I do think Yan is the more damaging of the two on the feet, and I think that's going to be the big X factor.
Yeah, and it was interesting because my slip up of Yan and O'Malley, but in the Yan fight with O'Malley, it was Yan going out there for the takedowns, Yan trying to initiate some of the wrestling, and for O'Malley from distance, he had success with the striking, something that Petr Yan is a wizard at.
Exactly.
So the thing that's going to interest me the most is what stance are we going to see Petr Yan come out of, and what are we going to see him find his success at with his boxing combinations? Is he going to offer up different stance switches against such a good wrestler in Merab?
I think he's going to open orthodox, but he will switch southpaw, but I'll say he'll open right-handed.
And we'll see if that opens more the threat of the takedown from Merab. But a giant all-timer type of fight in the bantamweight division. You've seen fight of the nights out of Petr Yan in the past, and you think of a guy that brought the fight to him and brought the best out of Petr Yan. Remember that fight with Jinsu Son? That was a fight of the night. Son was able to get a takedown, performance bonus over Uriah Faber, fight of the night against Corey Sandhagen. And again, I said this to open the show, but if Chandler Chandler and Gaethje didn't exist, Jan and Sandhagen probably would have been fight of the year a couple of years ago. So we have a look at the odds in the matchup. Jan is the favorite. He's continued to gain there. Merab, underdog, like so. We have a look in the YouTube community tab for this one. We threw that out there in the morning. You folks voted. Almost 1,000 total votes. 70% Jan, 30% Dvalishvili. Dominic is saying, I know Merab has wrestling advantage, but I have a feeling Petr is going to try and finish the fight from the recent razor-close decisions.
That's a good take.
2 split decision losses in a row for Jan. I think many will be against me, but I feel like Merab is going to win from a name that's way too long. Flying Moose, Jan has been training for Aljo for so long, I feel like Merab is just a worse version of him, so I'm going to take Jan by finish. I don't agree with how you got to your answer, but we'll go from that. And Tom is saying Merab. So it's a tricky one. You know, the fan vote and the way that people go is usually a little bit different, but 70% going with Petr in the matchup. We've been big on, you know,
I feel like I've been high on Merab, though, honestly.
It's a tough pick when you try and get down to it.
It certainly is, and that's the thing. Both guys are extremely talented. I've said this 1,000 times throughout these videos. The bantamweight division is arguably the best in the whole entire UFC. I do have Petr though, for these reasons. If Merab Dvalishvili is going to win this fight, a lot of it is going to be based off of the control factor, be it with the clinch and with the takedowns, and not necessarily with a lot of the damaging strikes. Whereas with Petr, he really makes you pay when he is throwing a lot of those strikes. And Jan's one of those unique guys who can lose 4 minutes of a round based on the control to just come back in those last 60 seconds and really shift the ties based on his striking. We saw that in the Jimmy Rivera fight. Rivera won 14 minutes of that fight. It just so happened that the last 20 seconds of every round were just so dominant for Petr. And again, Dvalishvili has incredible cardio. I don't doubt his cardio. That's not what I'm sitting here saying. I'm just curious to see what his output with his takedowns is going to look like in a 25-minute atmosphere as opposed to a 15-minute one. So I think it's a great fight for Merab, but I do find myself favoring Petr.
And I mean, Merab, 8 wins in a row, and you go down through some of these wins. Gustavo Lopez, Tyrion Ware, Brad Katona, who's back on The Ultimate Fighter. He did finish Marlon Moraes in one of the wildest comebacks you've ever seen because he got put on skates a couple of times, ended the first round in a great position, and then finished it in the second. Merab's got a great opportunity in the matchup. I'm going to go with Petr here, and I think it's the boxing combinations on the outside, the footwork that are really going to play a factor for him. But again, we've seen Petr where he's been in some of these compromising positions. Exactly. You guys talk about Aljamain Sterling, Merab's not as good as him, whatever. Aljamain Sterling's only getting better because of Merab Dvalishvili, and likewise, Merab's going to be able to gain from the insight out of 2 fights that Sterling's already had.
Different kind of grapplers, too. Sterling's much more of the jiu-jitsu side of the grappling. Of course, he has great wrestling, don't get me wrong. Whereas Merab's much more of that power wrestling.
Just fitting like a glove, that compliment there. But Matt, an absolutely great fight card on this one. 14 total fights as of taping on Sunday night. But of course, Nurmagomedov, he might end up back on the card. Maybe some fights fall out, fights are added, whatever. You can find us here at Fight Night Picks for all of those updates. Really, really big and high on some of these prospects that are featured here, and a decent amount of ranked contenders, 6 of them on the card so far. Bantamweight, really the showcase division on this one, so I can't wait for it. I mean, listen, the theater at the Virgin Hotels, first time they're playing host to a UFC card. It used to be the Joint at the Hard Rock. Some big Tom Petty concerts there way back in the day.
To quote Drake, she want to rebound with me, I'm down to go get us some boards. We just came off one of the best pay-per-views of the year, and the fact that we get this card as sort of the hangover, if you will, to
Board
the
man
great
gets
fight
paid.
Is phenomenal, because that's the thing. Could you imagine if we had like a Norma Dumont main event to follow a John Jones versus Cyril Gane one? Yeah, nobody would be excited for that, but we have Petr, a man who I have said on this channel I thought was going to become the GOAT of the bantamweight division. I genuinely think that's the ceiling that this man possesses based off the skills that he's shown, but how can you doubt a guy like Merab Dvalishvili, who seems like every single time people bring up some of the shortcomings in his game, but the wrestling, the cardio, just the stick-to-itiveness seems to get him the win, so it's a great card top to bottom.
Give him flack when they deserve it, give him praise when they deserve it. After this, it's Edwards versus Usman, then Vera versus Sandhagen, Pereira versus Adesanya.
We're on a good run right now.
Holloway versus Allen, Pavlovich, Blades. It just continues to go on and on and on, so the UFC's got a pretty darn good slate of fights coming up. You can check out all of the great action here at Fight Night Picks, Twitter and Instagram, the YouTube channel as well. Those individual videos come out soon, and we also have question mark kicks 2 hours before the prelims. If there's any pick changes, the official ones get locked in there on Saturday. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.